beneath the crust of our familiar world, where maps end and darkness begins, whispers tell of a realm untouched by time, an inner kingdom known in legend as Agartha. Some describe it as a sanctuary of crystal cities and eternal light, where the descendants of lost civilizations, Lemuria, Atlantis, perhaps even cultures we have no name for, still walk. Others believe it is not a place at all, but a frequency, a hidden layer of reality that can be entered only when one's spirit and mind are aligned. Across continents and centuries, from the Himalayan peaks to the deserts of Egypt, from the frozen gates of Antarctica to the green heart of the Amazon, stories converge on the same impossible idea, that a vast and thriving civilization may exist just beneath our feet. If these tales are more than myth, then our understanding of history and of ourselves is incomplete. Tonight, we follow the trails of explorers, the coded accounts of monks, the whispers of shamans, and the clues buried in ancient stone, to ask the question few dare to: what if the greatest empire is the one we've never seen? Settle in, keep your mind open, and welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. The first trace of the mystery emerges not from the dust of an archaeological dig or the faded ink of an ancient manuscript, but from something far older. Stories carried in the human voice, passed from firelit nights to restless dreams. They speak of survivors from civilizations long erased from the surface, people who vanished into the depths of the earth during an age of cataclysm and never returned to live among us. These are the Lemurians, the Atlanteans, names that echo like myths yet refuse to fade entirely, and they are said to have found refuge in a realm known as Agartha. In this telling, Agartha is not buried in molten rock or molten iron, as modern geology would have us believe about the Earth's core, but instead lies within vast hollow spaces, complete with rivers, lakes, forests, and cities powered by light that doesn't come from the sun. Those who speak of it describe its inhabitants as highly advanced, not just in engineering or science, but in the art of living in harmony with natural forces, masters of both technology and a kind of spiritual wisdom that has no place in the fractured politics of the surface. It is a world portrayed as untouched by war, greed, or the endless competition that marks our history above ground, a place where knowledge is not hoarded for power, but shared as the guiding principle of society. The concept first took root in the Western mind in the late 19th century, when a French writer named Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre published a book called Mission of India in Europe. Saint-Yves was a man fascinated by the intersections of politics, esoteric knowledge, and what he saw as the hidden mechanisms of the world. In his work, he claimed that Agartha was real, a vast underground kingdom to which wise people of an earlier age had retreated during what Hindu tradition calls the Kali Yuga, a dark cycle of human decline. The term Kali Yuga refers to the last of 4 great epochs in Hindu cosmology, an age marked by moral decay, conflict, and the loss of truth. According to Saint-Yves, these ancestors were not destroyed, as most histories insist, but withdrew deliberately, preserving themselves and their knowledge until the right time to emerge once more. In his account, Agartha was not a scattered collection of hidden enclaves, but a massive city-state with millions of inhabitants. It was governed by a ruler who embodied both spiritual mastery and absolute authority, operating under a system Saint-Yves called synarchy, a form of governance in which religion, science, and politics function together in perfect balance, a stark contrast to the fragmented and often chaotic governments of the surface world. Even more curious was the way Saint-Yves claimed to have learned of this place. He spoke of a mysterious teacher, Haji Sharif, a man he described as a high-ranking spiritual master from the East, and of journeys undertaken not by foot or ship, but by what he called astral projection, a state in which consciousness travels without the body. Saint-Yves wrote about Agartha with such detail and certainty that to read his words is to feel as though he had truly been there, walking its streets and speaking to its people. At first, Mission of India in Europe was not intended for public eyes. Saint-Yves is said to have destroyed most copies, perhaps out of fear that he had revealed too much. But one survived, and in 1910, years after his death, it was published by Gérard Encos, better known in occult circles as Papoose. From there, the legend of Agartha began to spread in the West. Yet Saint-Yves was not the first European to hint at such a place. Decades earlier, a French colonial official named Louis Jacoliot had written about a kingdom called Asgartha, which he claimed to have found in ancient Indian manuscripts. The similarity in name and concept is difficult to ignore, but the deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that Agartha is not the invention of a single man or even a single culture. Long before it had a name in European literature, ancient civilizations around the world were telling stories of realms beneath the earth, places of beauty, knowledge, and strange inhabitants, described in ways remarkably similar to one another despite vast distances and supposed isolation. In Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, for instance, there is Mount Meru, or Sumeru, a sacred peak said to stand at the center of all worlds. It is depicted as a cosmic axis, a pillar holding reality together, with slopes that gleam like crystal from the east, lapis lazuli from the south, ruby from the west, and gold from the north. Beneath this mountain lies Patala, a multi-layered underworld not of punishment, like the Western concept of hell, but of lush beauty. Palaces studded with jewels, forests alive with light, and rivers that shimmer in the dark. The beings said to dwell there, Nagas, serpent-like guardians, Danavas, beings of great power, and Rakshasas, fierce warriors, are depicted in ancient texts as both advanced and formidable. They command technologies and spiritual abilities beyond what surface dwellers could imagine. And while some are described as benevolent, others are seen as potentially dangerous to humankind. These themes ripple outward into Tibetan traditions, where stories speak of tunnels beneath Himalayan monasteries, leading to secret shrines and vast subterranean cities. One such place is Shambala, a kingdom of peace and enlightenment, hidden from the unready and accessible only to those who have reached a certain spiritual maturity. Some esoteric interpretations link Shambala and Agartha as twin realms, two halves of a deeper mystery, one aligned with divine order, the other with raw, elemental power. In either case, both are guardians of ancient knowledge, and both are said to be shielded from those who would misuse what they find there. If these parallels were isolated, they might be dismissed as coincidence or the universal human tendency to imagine hidden worlds. But the trail does not stop in Asia. Across the world, in the high deserts of what is now Arizona, the Hopi people tell of a time when the surface of the earth was destroyed twice, once by fire, once by ice. During these catastrophes, they say, celestial beings led their ancestors to the ant people, the Anu Sinom, who sheltered them in great underground chambers. There, the Hopi learned how to grow food without sunlight, how to store supplies for years, and how to live in balance with the earth. The Hopi even explain the narrow wastes of ants today as a result of sharing their food during those desperate times. And in their language, the word for ant is anu, and friends is naki, together forming Anunnaki, a striking echo of the ancient Sumerian term for beings who came from the heavens or from beneath the earth to guide early humans. Across continents, the pattern repeats, cultures separated by oceans and centuries describing a world beneath the surface, inhabited by beings of great knowledge and power. The question is not just whether these tales are connected, but how they came to be so alike. Could it be that some ancient civilization did not vanish, but simply moved below? And if so, could they still be there, hidden in a place where no map dares to draw a border? If the stories are more than myth, then the question becomes not only whether such a place exists, but also whether our science has been looking in the wrong direction entirely. In the 17th century, long before satellites and seismic mapping, the idea of a hollow Earth emerged not from mystical speculation, but from the mind of a respected astronomer. Edmund Halley, best known today for calculating the orbit of the comet that bears his name. In 1692, Halley proposed that the Earth might be composed of concentric spheres, like nested shells, each spinning at different speeds. He imagined vast hollow spaces between these layers, perhaps filled with air, and even suggested that light could come from deep within, hinting at the possibility of life inside. While his theory was meant to explain anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field, it inadvertently provided a scientific-sounding framework for a vision of a world beneath the one we know. A century later, in the early 1800s, an American named John Cleves Simmis, Jr. took the idea further, declaring not only that the Earth was hollow, but that it had enormous openings at the poles, gateways, in his view, to the inner world. He was so convinced of his theory that he petitioned Congress and lobbied investors to fund an expedition to the Arctic. His speeches drew both ridicule and fascination, but he never managed to gather the resources to prove his point. Still, his vision of polar entrances captured the imagination of others, setting the stage for future explorations and, eventually, modern conspiracy theories about what lies beneath the ice. By the early 20th century, Marshall Gardner expanded these ideas into something even more elaborate. In his book, A Journey to the Earth's Interior, Gardner proposed that the Earth was completely hollow and contained a small, glowing inner sun suspended in the center. This inner sun, he argued, provided light and warmth for a hidden ecosystem of forests, lakes, and possibly entire civilizations. In his model, gravity worked differently. As one moved inside the shell, the pull shifted toward the inner surface, creating a strange new down where the ground was overhead compared to the outer world. The idea was as disorienting as it was compelling. A world turned inside out, where up and down lose their meaning, and the horizon curves above you. Such theories might sound like imaginative fiction, but they take on a different weight when placed beside the recurring themes in ancient accounts. Across cultures, entrances to the underworld are guarded, hidden, or accessible only through unusual conditions, whether a spiritual state, a specific alignment of the stars, or the permission of those who dwell there. In Tibet, Mount Kailash is said to be such a portal. Though not the tallest peak in the Himalayas, no one has ever reached its summit. Climbers report strange weather shifts, sudden illness, or simply an unshakable sense that they should turn back. Local belief holds that only one man, the Buddhist yogi Milarepa, ever reached the top, and he did so not by physical climbing, but through spiritual ascent. In some esoteric traditions, Kailash is not a mountain at all, but an immense, ancient pyramid, its slopes eroded and its secrets buried beneath snow and stone. The notion of guarded entrances repeats on the other side of the world at Mount Shasta in Northern California, where stories tell of an underground city called Telos, said to have been built by the surviving Lemurians after their homeland was lost. Over the decades, the mountain has drawn spiritual seekers, mystics, and adventurers, many of whom report sightings of tall, robed figures vanishing into the forest or strange lights moving against the night sky. In 1987, it became the focal point of the Harmonic Convergence, a global meditation event meant to align human consciousness with cosmic cycles, a moment that only deepened the mountain's association with hidden realms and interdimensional gateways. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza and the enigmatic Sphinx are more than monuments of stone. They are, for some, markers for something far older and deeper. Beneath the Giza Plateau, recent scans have revealed chambers and passageways unrecorded in official maps. Among these, legends speak of the Hall of Records, a chamber said to contain the wisdom of a civilization that predates the pharaohs, perhaps even the Great Flood mentioned in multiple ancient traditions. The Sphinx, carved from bedrock and weathered in ways that suggest a much greater age than mainstream archaeology admits, is seen by some as the guardian of this knowledge, and possibly the gatekeeper to an entrance leading into the Earth's interior. Even in more recent history, there are stories that defy easy dismissal. In Antarctica, a continent shrouded in ice and mystery, the late 1930s saw a German expedition establish what they called Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. Officially, it was a scientific mission, but rumors persist that the team discovered tunnels and caverns beneath the ice leading to an inner world. After World War II, the U.S. Navy launched Operation High Jump, a massive Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. The mission, planned for months, was abruptly cut short. Decades later, a diary attributed to Byrd surfaced, describing a flight beyond the South Pole into a land of green valleys, warm air, and strange, advanced beings who warned him about the destructive path of the surface world. Whether authentic or a posthumous fabrication, the account continues to fuel speculation that the poles are more than just icy deserts. The Amazon rainforest, too, holds its share of whispered entrances. Indigenous tribes tell of glowing caverns hidden deep in the jungle, accessible only to those who are called by the guardians of the forest. In places where these stories persist, travelers vanish without explanation, compasses spin wildly, and the air feels charged with a presence that defies explanation. Those who return speak of lights moving like living things, and voices that seem to rise from the ground itself. What unites all of these tales? Whether they come from ancient Sanskrit texts, Native American oral history, or 20th century expeditions, is a core pattern. The idea that a more advanced civilization survives below us, choosing when and to whom it reveals itself. If such a place exists, then our maps are incomplete in the most literal sense. And if it does not, the consistency of the myth across time and geography demands another explanation, one that could be as astonishing as the idea of Agartha itself. For now, the entrances remain elusive. Perhaps they are sealed by design, opening only when the seeker is ready in ways that have nothing to do with physical tools or coordinates. Perhaps they lie in places we have already passed, hidden in plain sight because our eyes are not yet tuned to see them. What is certain is that the world beneath our feet remains the last great shadow on the map, a place where science, myth, and possibility converge. And in that convergence lies the promise, or the warning, that we have barely begun to understand what it means to truly know our planet. If there is any truth to the idea of a hidden world, the most crucial question is not where it is, but why it has remained hidden for so long. In most legends, the explanation is not that the inhabitants lack the means to make contact with us, but that they have chosen not to, at least not openly. The story repeats. Those who live below do not wish to be found until humanity has reached a state where knowledge will not be used for domination or destruction. This is not a test of technology, but of temperament. To them, power is dangerous in the hands of a civilization still struggling with greed, division, and mistrust. It is an idea uncomfortably consistent with our own history, which shows that whenever humanity encounters something of immense value, be it land, resources, or ideas, we tend to claim it, weaponize it, or exploit it. Yet the secrecy is not complete. Many accounts suggest that the surface and inner worlds have met at specific times in history, often during moments of crisis or transformation. The Hopi recall their rescue by the ant people during global catastrophe. Tibetan teachings tell of monks who receive messages from Shambala. Explorers have claimed strange encounters in the Arctic or deep jungles that defy explanation. Even in medieval Europe, there were tales of travelers who vanished into caves and returned with stories of luminous cities and impossible machines. The pattern hints at selective contact, an opening of the gate for those judged ready or necessary for a particular purpose. The notion that such contact could be restricted not by geography but by something like a frequency has become a fixture of modern interpretations. Imagine the world as a layered broadcast with multiple stations playing at once. You can't hear them all. You only hear the one you're tuned into. In this view, Agartha, or whatever name different cultures give it, exists constantly, but just beyond the range of our senses. The tuning is not done with radios or machines, but through the state of the individual, mental clarity, emotional stability, and a balance between the rational and the spiritual. In many traditions, this idea appears as a veil or threshold, one that shifts based on the inner condition of the traveler. Such an idea may sound mystical, yet it overlaps strangely with certain scientific concepts. Modern physics acknowledges that the universe is filled with forms of energy we cannot directly perceive, dark matter and dark energy being only the most famous examples. We know that perception itself is limited. Our eyes see only a sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, Our ears hear only a narrow band of sound frequencies. If entire realities exist outside these ranges, then the leap from theory to possibility is not as far as it seems. In this way, the frequency concept could be a metaphor for dimensions beyond our usual reach, or perhaps a literal description of a barrier that is physical in ways we do not yet understand. The guardianship of such entrances, if real, would then have both physical and metaphysical aspects. In the Himalayas, monks are said to watch over pathways hidden in glacial valleys. In South America, shamans speak of sacred paths that lead not to gold, but to silence, a phrase suggesting that the reward is not material treasure, but entry into a place where words, and perhaps the surface world's constant noise, have no meaning. In Egypt, the guardian is the Sphinx, a monument older than much of recorded history, whose massive form may mark not only a ceremonial gateway, but a literal one beneath its paws. Antarctica's entrances, according to certain accounts, are not unguarded ice tunnels, but are defended by wall guardians, beings who are said to appear only to those who approach with the wrong intent. The idea that governments or secret societies might have knowledge of these entrances and actively keep them from public view is another thread in this tapestry. The reasoning, according to those who believe it, is not purely selfish. There is genuine fear of what would happen if the truth became common knowledge. A sudden rush of treasure hunters, militaries, or corporations toward a peaceful inner world could destroy it in months. In this light, secrecy becomes a kind of shield, though one built on the assumption that the surface world will never be ready. And yet, there is another possibility, one less often spoken aloud, but present in the undertone of many accounts. What if the hidden civilization is not entirely peaceful? What if their withdrawal wasn't solely an act of self-preservation, but a way to control their own destiny without interference? Ancient myths often frame underworld beings as protectors, but they can also be tricksters, warriors, or even aggressors under the right circumstances. In the Indian epics, the Nagas are wise, but sometimes dangerous. In Greek mythology, the underworld is ruled by deities who can be both generous and ruthless. If Agartha or a similar realm exists, its inhabitants might have their own divisions, their own politics, and their own reasons for controlling the terms of contact. This duality, protector or manipulator, complicates the narrative. It suggests that the caution about revealing themselves might not be entirely about protecting us from ourselves, but also about preserving their own way of life from forces they cannot control. From this perspective, the readiness they speak of could be as much about their readiness as ours. The physical reality of such a place, if it exists, would require rethinking much of what we know about geology. Conventional science tells us that beneath the crust lies the mantle, then the outer core of molten iron, then a solid inner core. Seismic data supports this model, yet it is also true that much of it is based on indirect measurements, interpretations of how seismic waves travel through the Earth. If there are large cavities, networks of tunnels, or even enclosed ecosystems within the crust or upper mantle, they might go undetected unless specifically searched for. And here, the sheer size of the planet becomes an advantage for secrecy. The Earth's volume is vast enough to hide entire regions from detection, especially if those regions are shielded by dense rock, magnetic anomalies, or other natural phenomena that interfere with exploration. Explorers who have ventured into deep cave systems sometimes speak of sensations that are difficult to explain: shifts in time perception, sudden disorientation, the feeling of being watched in complete silence. In some cases, compasses spin or stop, equipment malfunctions, and shadows seem to move in the absence of light. While such reports can be attributed to psychological effects of isolation, they match, in curious ways, the descriptions given by ancient sources about the approach to hidden realms. If such entrances exist all over the globe, from icy poles to burning deserts, from mountains to jungle valleys, it is tempting to imagine them connected by a vast subterranean network. In the Agartha legend, these pathways are not rough-hewn caves, but engineered corridors, some lined with luminous crystals said to channel energy in ways unknown to surface science. The very scale of such construction would require a civilization with technology, resources, and stability far beyond anything we have achieved. In the end, the most intriguing aspect of the mystery may not be whether the hidden world exists, but the fact that so many cultures, across so much time, have insisted on telling us that it does. If the idea of Agartha is a metaphor, it is a remarkably persistent one. If it is real, it may be the most important discovery humanity has yet to make. Not for the treasure or technology it might contain, but for what it would reveal about the limits of our own perception. For now, it remains out of reach, the ultimate unanswered question beneath our feet, a story that draws us downward into the unknown with equal parts hope and caution. If we trace the map of these alleged entrances, a strange pattern emerges, one that seems less like random chance and more like deliberate placement. The points form lines, curves, and alignments that, if drawn across the globe, connect some of the most mysterious locations on Earth. Mount Kailash in Tibet aligns through ancient routes to the Giza Plateau in Egypt. The supposed Antarctic openings can be connected to South America's hidden caverns. Mount Shasta aligns with volcanic chains that stretch deep into the Pacific. These are not arbitrary points. In many cases, the locations themselves have been venerated for centuries, marked in myth as navels of the world, places where the visible and invisible intersect. Such alignments are reminiscent of what archaeologists call ley lines, a controversial term for alignments of ancient sites believed by some to follow paths of geomagnetic or energetic significance. While mainstream science sees these alignments as coincidence, in the context of the Agartha hypothesis, they begin to look more like a blueprint. In nearly every culture that speaks of a hidden realm, there is also a story of catastrophic change, a flood, a fire, a freezing age that forces survivors either into the depths or into the sky. In Sumerian legend, the great flood that nearly erased humanity was survived only by those given warning by beings of extraordinary knowledge. In the Andean traditions, the god Viracocha is said to have retreated into the earth after shaping the world and teaching its first peoples. In Hopi and Navajo oral history, times of destruction drove the ancestors into the care of subterranean protectors. The recurrence of this pattern, the withdrawal of teachers and guardians into hidden places, suggests that the idea of Agartha may be less about geography and more about a cycle. Times when the surface world becomes unsafe, and a refuge is needed for what must be preserved. It is this concept of preservation that makes the legend so compelling. Imagine a place where the accumulated knowledge of tens of thousands of years, technologies lost to time, histories erased from the surface, languages unspoken for millennia, is stored intact. The Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx is only one such alleged repository. Tibetan lore speaks of libraries in crystal vaults, their contents accessible not by physical reading, but by direct mental connection. If even a fraction of these stories are true, then Agartha would be less a city and more an ark, its inhabitants custodians of the memory of civilization itself. Some researchers who follow the Agartha Trail point to modern events that might hint at attempts to reach it. In the mid-20th century, there were reports, often dismissed as rumor, of military expeditions to remote regions, not for strategic gain, but for geophysical studies in places already linked to subterranean legends. In 1947, the year after Admiral Byrd's Antarctic mission, a highly classified meeting was said to have taken place between U.S. officials and scientists to discuss polar anomalies. Although the documents remain sealed or missing, the whispers around them echo the same caution that runs through older stories, that something exists beyond our current understanding, and that opening the door without preparation could bring consequences we cannot foresee. Yet for all the guarded secrecy, there are also moments when the barrier seems to thin, allowing hints to slip through. Cave explorers in South America have told of hearing machinery deep underground in places where no human industry exists. In Siberia, expeditions have encountered vast underground chambers with walls that reflect light without any visible source. In the mountains of China, certain monks speak of sky wells within caverns, vertical shafts so tall that their upper end is lost in a glow like dawn. While any one of these accounts could be explained by natural phenomena, their similarity to elements in the Agartha tradition is difficult to overlook. The deeper mystery lies in the nature of the supposed inhabitants. Descriptions vary. Sometimes they are human-like, but taller, with features that seem refined almost to the point of perfection. Sometimes they are said to be descended from civilizations like Atlantis or Lemuria, carrying with them the genetics and knowledge of worlds now lost. In other traditions, they are not entirely human at all, but hybrids, blending terrestrial biology with traits from elsewhere being left deliberately vague, whether another planet, another dimension, or another cycle of Earth's own history. Regardless of their origin, they are almost always portrayed as possessing a mastery over energy and matter that seems miraculous to us but is, in their world, ordinary. This mastery extends to their environment. In Agartha lore, entire cities are said to be powered by crystalline systems that draw energy from the planet's natural fields. These crystal generators are described as humming with a frequency that sustains both the structures and the life around them. Light is said to come not from flames or bulbs, but from walls and ceilings that glow with a steady radiance, soft enough to be gentle, bright enough to support plant growth. Water runs pure from underground rivers, channeled through conduits that never clog or wear down. Waste and decay are recycled into the system with an efficiency that makes the idea of pollution meaningless. If these descriptions are fanciful, they are at least consistent, painted in the same detail by people and cultures that never met. One might wonder, if such a world exists, why not simply emerge and share its wonders? But the Agartha narrative offers a sobering answer. History is littered with examples of contact between advanced and less advanced societies, and those encounters rarely end well for the latter. The fear is not just that we would exploit their knowledge, but that we would fail to understand it, using tools meant for harmony in ways that create imbalance, as has happened countless times with technology on the surface. In that sense, the withdrawal is not arrogance, but survival, a way to keep both worlds intact. Still, there are those who believe the time of separation is nearing its end. In modern spiritual circles, prophecies circulate about a return of the inner world, when the gates will open as part of a larger planetary shift. These prophecies often tie to cycles in ancient calendars, astronomical alignments, or even global crises, moments when humanity stands at a crossroads. Whether one views these as hopeful visions or convenient reinterpretations, they feed into a growing sense that if Agartha is real, its story is not yet finished. And so the search continues, both in the literal sense, expeditions to mountains, poles, and caves, and in the metaphorical sense, as seekers attempt to tune themselves to the right frequency. Perhaps the two are not so different. If the barrier between our worlds is as much about perception as it is about stone and distance, then the true expedition might be an inward one, a journey to cultivate the qualities the legends insist are necessary: clarity, humility, balance. Only then, the stories say, will the path appear. Until that moment, Agartha remains what it has always been: a whisper under the ground, a shape in the dark, a question that refuses to go away. The notion of a vast inhabited world beneath our feet demands a confrontation with one of the most stubborn human limitations: the assumption that what we see is all there is. Modern maps portray the Earth's surface in extraordinary detail. Every mountain ridge, river bend, and coastline measured down to the meter. Yet those same maps reduce the inner Earth to a diagram of molten layers and dense metal, a model based not on direct exploration, but on interpretations of seismic data and magnetic readings. If the Agartha hypothesis is correct, then our instruments may be recording only what they are designed to detect, filtering out anomalies because they do not fit the model. The reality, in that case, would be stranger and more complex than any cross-section in a geology textbook. There have been curious hints that something is missing from the official picture. Explorers who have traveled near the poles, both north and south, have sometimes reported strange shifts in temperature, unexpected fog banks, or the sudden appearance of open water in places where ice should dominate year-round. Such phenomena are usually explained as the result of shifting currents or temporary weather patterns, but in the hollow Earth framework, they could be signs of thermal exchange between inner and outer worlds. If warm air or water is escaping from vast subterranean chambers, it could create localized climates unlike anything nearby. The accounts of Admiral Byrd's 1947 flight into a temperate green land beyond the South Pole may be controversial and unverified, but they align uncannily with these descriptions. Even without polar access, the possibility of vast interior spaces is not as far-fetched as it might seem. On the surface, we are familiar with massive cave systems, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, Son Jong in Vietnam, that stretch for miles and contain ecosystems isolated for millions of years. These are formed by water, erosion, and tectonic shifts, but they prove that large habitable spaces can exist naturally beneath the crust. Now imagine those spaces on a far grander scale, not as random caverns but as interconnected regions shaped deliberately by intelligent hands. Ancient accounts speak of tunnels that run for hundreds of miles, linking distant lands, of chambers so vast that their ceilings vanish into artificial daylight, of underground lakes reflecting cities built into the rock. Whether one sees these as poetic exaggerations or as coded memories, the imagery is powerful enough to persist across centuries. In some cases, the myths carry a practical precision. Tibetan stories place entrances in exact valleys, guarded by monasteries whose positions align with star maps. In South America, certain tribes can point to hillsides where stone doors are said to open during particular celestial events. In the American Southwest, Hopi elders have long identified specific mesas as thresholds, warning outsiders not to disturb them. These are not vague, wandering tales. They are anchored to geography, woven into the lived experience of the people who tell them. To dismiss them as mere superstition is to ignore the way human cultures encode and protect information over time. Then there are the reports from those who claim accidental contact, incidents in which hikers, spelunkers, or remote workers stumble into environments that defy explanation. One account from the mid-20th century describes a survey team in the Andes who entered a cave seeking shelter from a storm, only to find themselves in a tunnel of smooth, seamless walls that curved gently downward. After walking for what felt like hours, they emerged into a chamber illuminated by a soft ambient glow with no visible source. In the center stood a structure resembling a temple, though unlike any known architecture in the region. Before they could approach, a low hum filled the air, and the light dimmed. The next moment they were standing back at the cave's entrance, the storm gone, and the sun low in the sky. Whether this was a psychological episode, a shared hallucination, or something beyond conventional explanation, the strangeness of the details echoes the entrance myths of multiple cultures. What is most striking about such encounters is how often they include a manipulation of perception or time. People speak of losing hours that pass in moments, or of experiencing days within a span that should have been minutes. This distortion aligns with the hollow earth idea in which the inner environment may have its own gravitational and temporal dynamics. Some versions of the theory propose that the closer one moves towards the inner sun, the hypothesized luminous core that sustains Agartha, the more elastic time becomes. Inhabitants of such a world might live far longer than surface dwellers simply because their time flows differently. If such differences exist, they could also explain the extraordinary technological and spiritual development attributed to the Agarthans. A society that experiences centuries in the span of our decades could refine its sciences, arts, and philosophies far beyond our current capacity. More importantly, they could test and perfect systems of governance and resource management over time frames that allow mistakes to be corrected without the urgency and instability of surface politics. This might be why so many accounts describe Agartha as a place of harmony, not because its people are inherently better, but because their circumstances allow for long-term balance. Of course, the skeptic's view is that such descriptions are merely projections of human ideals. We imagine a hidden world as perfect because we long for perfection ourselves. Yet even if that is the case, it leaves unanswered the question of why so many unrelated cultures imagine that perfection as existing below ground rather than in the heavens or some far-off land. Perhaps the subterranean setting serves a psychological function. It is both distant and close, hidden yet part of our world, suggesting that paradise is not unreachable, but simply unseen. Or perhaps the choice of below has older roots, tied to a time when humanity's survival depended literally on going underground, whether to escape predators, weather, or disaster. The persistence of these ideas through millennia suggests that, at the very least, they fulfill a deep cultural need. They offer the possibility of refuge, of continuity in the face of collapse, and of a wisdom untouched by the cycles of rise and fall that have claimed every known civilization. In times of uncertainty, the thought that such a place might be real, whether physical or symbolic, can be a source of both comfort and motivation. And if one takes the investigative path seriously, following the lines of evidence from myth to map, from rumor to report, the possibility begins to seem less like fantasy and more like a question waiting for the right tools to answer. The problem, of course, is that those tools are not only physical. Finding Agartha, or proving it does not exist, would require penetrating not just the Earth's crust, but the veil of secrecy, intentional or otherwise, that surrounds the idea. It would mean approaching with the right combination of technology, cultural understanding, and perhaps even personal discipline. Whether such a combination will ever come together is unknown. Until it does, the legend will remain what it has always been, an open case in the oldest investigation humanity has ever undertaken. A riddle whispered in the dark, asking whether we are truly alone on this planet, or whether we have neighbors we have yet to meet. If the search for Agartha is an investigation, then its evidence comes in two forms: the ancient record and the modern anomaly. The ancient record is rich with myth, symbolism, and oral tradition. The modern anomaly lives in unexplained data points, unpublicized discoveries, and the rare testimony of those who claim to have seen more than they were allowed to speak of. It is in the tension between these two that the mystery deepens. Myths by themselves can be dismissed as metaphor. Anomalies by themselves can be filed away as experimental error. But when both point to the same hidden possibility, the story refuses to stay buried. In the archives of Buddhist monasteries in the Himalayas, there are scrolls that speak of a world within the world connected to ours by the roots of sacred mountains. These writings describe gates of stone that open not by key, but by sound, using harmonic tones that resonate with the structure of the entrance. In modern terms, it would be like a lock that responds not to a code or a card, but to a specific frequency, perhaps tuned to the natural vibration of the stone itself. In certain monasteries, there is even a ritual in which monks chant in patterns designed to imitate this harmonic, a tradition said to be both a prayer and a test. The implication is clear. Only those who can produce the resonance, either through training or inner state, can pass through. This detail finds a curious echo in accounts from deep cave explorers who report hearing tones or hums with no apparent source, often just before entering a chamber, unlike anything else in the system. These sounds are sometimes described as felt as much as heard, a vibration in the chest or bones. Seismologists might explain them as natural reverberations of the rock, but those who have heard them insist they are deliberate, almost like a signal or a challenge. If Agartha exists and is accessed through such means, it would represent a blending of architecture and acoustics far beyond our current building methods, where the physical structure and the entry protocol are the same. Modern anomalies also surface in places far from the mountains. In the Amazon, aerial surveys have revealed vast geometric earthworks, circles, squares, and lines carved into the forest floor, visible only from the air. While officially described as remnants of pre-Columbian settlements, their scale and precision raise questions about whether they might be markers for something below, not just evidence of habitation above. In some cases, these earthworks align with cave systems that extend far deeper than expected for the geology of the region, suggesting that ancient engineers were working with a knowledge of the subsurface that modern science has only recently begun to replicate. Then there are the incidents where modern exploration brushes against secrecy. In 1970, a joint expedition of European and South American scientists ventured into a remote section of the Andes to study high-altitude ecosystems. Their radio contact ceased unexpectedly for nearly 3 days, and when they returned, members of the team offered conflicting accounts of what had happened. Some blaming equipment failure, others citing sudden illness. Years later, one of the expedition members, speaking anonymously, claimed that the group had stumbled upon a cavern with architecture too precise to be natural. Before they could explore further, they were met by individuals who spoke an unfamiliar language and signaled them to leave. The description was vague, perhaps deliberately so, but it aligns with countless older stories in which those who reach the threshold are turned back. The role of turning people back, in fact, is another common thread across the Agartha narratives. Guardians appear in many forms: monks in robes, soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms, tall figures in metallic garments, even animals that behave in oddly purposeful ways. In some traditions, the guardians are not meant to fight, but to dissuade, using fear, confusion, or physical obstacles to send intruders away. This is consistent with the idea that Agartha's secrecy is not maintained by brute force, but by ensuring that most who come close lose the will or the ability to continue. Skeptics often point out that none of this constitutes hard evidence. There are no confirmed photographs of inner Earth cities, no rock samples from walls glowing with their own light, no DNA from the alleged inhabitants. Yet this absence may be part of the point. If such a civilization has survived undetected for millennia, it is because it has mastered the art of leaving no trace in the records we can access. This skill would be vital for survival, especially if they have observed the surface world's tendency to consume whatever it finds. In a way, their invisibility is itself a form of evidence. If we can imagine a civilization advanced enough to exist for thousands of years without leaving artifacts in our reach, we must also accept that proving its existence will require more than stumbling across a doorway. One of the most intriguing lines of inquiry comes from studying migration myths. There are accounts in Native American, Polynesian, and Asian traditions that suggest certain groups did not migrate across land or sea, but passed below and rose elsewhere. While historians typically read this as symbolic language for cultural change, it is notable how many such stories include specific place names, travel durations, and descriptions of landscapes both on departure and arrival. Some of these journeys, if taken literally, would be physically impossible on the surface, suggesting either a misunderstanding of the geography or movement through another route entirely. Energy anomalies also attract attention. Satellite readings have identified areas where electromagnetic activity deviates sharply from expected norms, sometimes in regions also linked to inner Earth legends. Pilots have reported instruments malfunctioning over certain mountains or plateaus, compasses spinning or freezing as if caught in a localized magnetic storm. These are the same kinds of malfunctions described near the poles, feeding the theory that the entrances, if they exist, may be cloaked by fields designed to mislead navigation. If there is a unifying principle behind all these scattered clues, it may be that Agartha is not simply a hidden location, but a system, a network of places, signals, and guardians that function together to keep the surface and inner worlds apart. From this perspective, each myth is not a full picture, but a fragment of a larger map, encoded in stories precisely so it could survive the erosion of memory and time. To investigate it is to assemble those fragments, knowing that some will never be found, and that others may have been altered to protect the whole. The most difficult truth for an investigator to accept is that the goal may not be to reach Agartha at all, but to understand why it has chosen not to reach us. The answer may lie not in the tunnels or chambers, but in the mirror, forcing us to ask whether the surface world, with all its ambition and conflict, could ever coexist with a place built on principles we barely comprehend. Until that question is answered, the gates, if they exist, may remain closed, leaving us with the oldest of human positions, standing at the edge of the unknown, wondering what and who waits on the other side. The challenge with a mystery like Agartha is that it operates in the space between legend and evidence, a liminal zone where the rules of conventional investigation begin to blur. In archaeology, a theory gains traction when it can be tied to material culture, artifacts, inscriptions, structures that can be dated and analyzed. In folklore studies, a theory gains weight when it can be traced through multiple independent traditions over time. The Agartha hypothesis straddles both categories, yet fits neatly into neither. It offers almost no physical artifacts in the public record, yet appears in dozens of unrelated cultural traditions. To ignore it entirely is to dismiss a remarkable anthropological phenomenon. To accept it uncritically is to risk being pulled into a web of unfalsifiable claims. The investigative path lies in the difficult middle, treating the myth as a lead, the same way a detective treats a tip, unproven but worth pursuing. One promising line of inquiry comes from the comparative study of underworld myths. When placed side by side, the similarities between them are too consistent to be accidental. Ancient Mesopotamian accounts speak of Abzu, a subterranean freshwater realm beneath the earth, guarded by the god Enki. The Greeks told of Hades, not merely a place of the dead, but a complex kingdom with its own geography and rulers. In the Norse Eddas, Svartalfaheim was the land of the dark elves, master craftsmen living beneath the mountains, while Helheim lay deeper still, beyond mortal reach. In each of these traditions, the underworld is not simply a void. It is structured, inhabited, and often technologically or magically advanced compared to the surface. This structural similarity suggests that we may be looking at a shared memory, refracted through different cultural lenses. In some cases, the echoes are shockingly precise. The Hopi ant people and the Sumerian Anunnaki share linguistic similarities that scholars are reluctant to call more than coincidence. Yet when both are described as advanced beings who sheltered humanity in times of crisis, the parallel becomes more than a linguistic curiosity. It becomes a narrative match. Even the detail of narrow wastes in the Hopi description, explained as the result of food sharing during famine, resonates with the way ancient Sumerian art depicts certain non-human figures. Tall, slender, with elongated skulls and proportionally narrow torsos. These similarities could of course be nothing more than the convergent evolution of myth. Or they could be the degraded memory of a real, ancient contact event preserved across continents. Modern attempts to explore suspected entrance points often run into obstacles that defy simple explanation. At Mount Kailash, multiple climbing expeditions have been abandoned after sudden weather changes, avalanches, or inexplicable illness among the climbers. In the deep Amazon, expeditions seeking rumored glowing caverns have been turned back by navigational failures, GPS devices losing signal without cause, compasses spinning wildly in circles, satellite phones refusing to connect even under clear skies. In Antarctica, military restrictions and international treaties limit where expeditions can go, creating large swaths of territory where civilian access is effectively impossible. On the surface, each of these situations has a practical explanation, but taken together, they form a pattern of avoidance zones, places where attempts to go deeper are met with resistance, whether from nature, politics, or the invisible hand of secrecy. The guardianship element, described so often in legend, takes on a more pragmatic tone when viewed through this lens. If entrances exist and are known to certain groups, be they governments, monastic orders, or something else, it is logical that they would control access with layers of deterrence. These could be as mundane as legal restrictions or as elaborate as active environmental manipulation. The point would not be to fight every intruder, but to ensure that most never reach the point of entry. Even in the ancient stories, the guardian's role is rarely to kill. It is to prevent the unready from crossing a threshold. One of the more speculative but intriguing aspects of the Agartha narrative is the suggestion that the entrances are not always fixed. Some traditions hold that they open and close according to celestial cycles, alignments of the sun, moon, and certain stars, or during rare planetary configurations. In this view, an entrance that is impenetrable for centuries might, under the right conditions, become passable for days or even hours. This would explain why so many myths place emphasis on timing, often wrapped in riddles or symbolic imagery. It would also account for the elusive nature of physical evidence. By the time an expedition can organize itself to investigate a reported opening, the conditions may have changed and the threshold sealed again. The interplay between physical and perceptual access is another recurring theme. In multiple accounts, seekers have reached what should be the precise location of an entrance only to find nothing, until something shifts. In some cases, the change is environmental, fog lifting to reveal a path, a shadow moving to expose an archway. In others, the change is internal. The seeker experiences a sudden calm or clarity, followed by the appearance of a feature they swear was not there before. Skeptics attribute these experiences to fatigue, suggestion, or the mind's tendency to pattern match under stress. But within the Agartha framework, They are exactly what one would expect if the gates are guarded not just by stone and distance, but by perception itself. One could argue that all of this belongs in the realm of spiritual allegory, a metaphor for inner transformation. Yet the persistent physical details, the named locations, the recurring environmental anomalies, the consistent descriptions of architecture and inhabitants anchor the legend to something more tangible. Even if the inner world were ultimately a parallel dimension rather than a hollow cavity within the planet, the effect would be the same. A hidden domain, physically reachable under certain conditions, existing alongside our own. This brings us to the most unsettling question. If such a place exists, are its inhabitants observing us? Many traditions say yes. They speak of scouts or envoys who move among us unnoticed, gathering information, guiding events, or in some cases, issuing warnings. In the alleged diary of Admiral Byrd, the beings he encountered expressed concern over the surface world's destructive path, particularly the development of nuclear weapons. In Tibetan accounts, messages from Shambala are said to reach the surface through dreams or visions given to select individuals. In the Amazon, shamans speak of the voices of the earth that advise them in times of crisis, voices that come from below, not above. These narratives taken together suggest a relationship, not of equals, but of watchfulness, as if the inner world has a stake in our survival, yet hesitates to intervene directly. If true, that hesitance might be the most telling clue of all. It implies that the separation between our worlds is deliberate and mutually maintained. The surface may not be ready to receive what the inner world could offer, and the inner world may not be willing to risk what exposure could cost them. Until that balance shifts, the connection will remain one of glimpses and whispers, a dialogue carried out at the edges of perception. For the investigator, this is both a frustration and an invitation. A reminder that the greatest discoveries often begin as stories too improbable to be believed, and that the line between the impossible and the merely undiscovered is thinner than we think. When following the trail of Agartha through history, one begins to notice that the myth is not confined to distant antiquity. It has a way of surfacing in moments of sudden change, as though the story itself is alive, drifting into human consciousness when conditions are right. The late 19th century, for example, saw a surge of interest in esoteric geography. Maps of hidden kingdoms, diagrams of mystical mountains, and theories of inner worlds that circulated in the salons of Paris and London. This was the era of Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre, whose writings on Agartha inspired a generation of occult thinkers. But it was also the era of increased exploration, with expeditions probing the poles, the deepest jungles, and the highest mountains. Each new frontier carried the possibility, however slim, of uncovering something extraordinary. The early 20th century added another layer, as advancements in aviation and radio began shrinking the world. Suddenly, regions that had taken months to reach could be visited in days, and information that had been the guarded property of explorers could be broadcast globally. It was during this period that Admiral Richard E. Byrd's expeditions to Antarctica took place, culminating in the infamous 1947 flight that, according to certain accounts, brought him into contact with an inner Earth civilization. Whether or not his alleged diary is authentic, the very fact that the story persisted and spread so widely reveals something about the collective appetite for such possibilities. In an age that prided itself on rationality and technological mastery, the idea that an entire world might still be hidden beneath our feet was both unsettling and irresistible. One reason the legend endures is that it taps into two powerful human instincts: the desire for discovery and the hope for guidance. In most versions of the story, the inhabitants of Agartha are not merely passive dwellers, but keepers of knowledge, guardians of technologies and philosophies that could help humanity overcome its most destructive tendencies. In this sense, Agartha functions as both a mystery and a promise: the mystery of its location and nature, and the promise that contact with it could lead to a profound transformation of life on the surface. That promise is what keeps researchers, adventurers, and spiritual seekers returning to the subject, even when repeated attempts yield nothing concrete. There is also the matter of physical plausibility, which skeptics are quick to dismiss. The conventional model of Earth's interior, a solid inner core surrounded by a molten outer core with the mantle above, seems to leave no room for vast habitable spaces. Yet geology is not a fixed map. It is an interpretation of signals, many of which are open to alternative explanations. Large subterranean cavities are known to exist closer to the surface, such as the enormous lava tubes in Hawaii and Iceland, some of which could fit skyscrapers inside. If such structures can form naturally, the idea of larger, deeper cavities, shaped or adapted by an advanced civilization, is not beyond the realm of physical possibility. The difficulty lies in proving it, especially if those who inhabit them have gone to great lengths to remain hidden. Modern technology offers tools that could, in theory, change the game. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and magnetic anomaly mapping could all detect irregularities far below the surface. And yet, for reasons that invite speculation, very few of these techniques are applied to the regions most often associated with the Agartha legend. In Antarctica, vast areas remain off-limits to non-military exploration under the Antarctic Treaty System. In the Himalayas, political and environmental restrictions limit where and how such studies can be conducted. In the Amazon, dense vegetation and challenging terrain make surveys both expensive and difficult. These obstacles, while explainable in conventional terms, also serve as effective barriers against targeted investigation. The legends themselves often hint that such barriers are intentional, whether maintained by human authorities or by the inhabitants of the inner world. The notion of guardians is consistent with this, but so is the concept of camouflage, entrances that look like nothing more than cliffs, forests, or stretches of ice until seen from a particular angle or under certain light. In some accounts, the entrances are said to be sealed with materials that blend seamlessly into the surrounding environment, undetectable to the untrained eye. Even modern imaging could fail to spot them if they are designed to absorb or scatter the signals our instruments rely on. Then there is the question of scale. If Agartha is truly a global network, its entrances might be far more numerous than the handful of famous sites mentioned in popular accounts. Lesser-known possibilities have been suggested in remote corners of Siberia, in the volcanic landscapes of the Canary Islands, and beneath certain regions of the Australian outback. Some of these areas are already known for unusual phenomena: mysterious lights, strange animal behavior, sudden drops in temperature or pressure that could, in the Agartha framework, be side effects of proximity to an access point. In each case, local folklore contains echoes of the larger myth. Beings who emerge from the earth, guidance offered to the lost, or warnings to those who approach too closely. The persistence of such stories across so many different landscapes hints at something deeper than mere coincidence. It may be that humanity carries a collective memory of a time when the surface and inner worlds were less separate, when contact was more common, or when a catastrophic event forced the two realms apart. In this scenario, the legends are not inventions but remnants, the cultural equivalent of fossils, marking the shape of a relationship that once existed. Over time, details are lost or altered, but the core image, the hidden refuge, the advanced inhabitants, the guarded entrances, remains intact. For those who pursue the mystery seriously, the challenge is knowing where to focus. Should the search target the most famous sites, where the legends are strongest but the obstacles greatest? Or should it look to the lesser-known locations, where access might be easier but the evidence less compelling? Some researchers choose a third path, studying the myths themselves for encoded information. Astronomical references that might indicate timing, symbolic language that could point to geological features, or recurring numbers that might correspond to distances or depths. This approach treats the legends not as literal history, but as maps written in metaphor, requiring the same kind of decoding one might apply to an ancient cipher. Ultimately, the question of Agartha forces us to confront the limits of our own perception, not just in the physical sense, but in the cultural and psychological sense as well. We live in a world where satellite images can show us the rooftops of cities on the other side of the planet. Yet we cannot say with certainty what lies a few miles beneath our own feet. The gap between what we think we know and what we actually know is larger than most are willing to admit. And in that gap, the possibility of a hidden world persists, waiting for the moment when curiosity, courage, and circumstance align to bridge it. Among those who devote themselves to the search for Agartha, there is an understanding that the investigation is not purely a matter of geography. It is also a matter of pattern recognition, tracing the ways in which certain symbols, names, and events repeat across cultures and centuries. These patterns often seem to emerge in unlikely places, revealing themselves only when one begins to overlay disparate traditions. A serpent coiled at the base of a cosmic mountain in Hindu iconography mirrors the serpent guardians of underground rivers in Native American legends. The image of a hidden sun beneath the world, seen in certain alchemical diagrams from Renaissance Europe, reflects the inner sun described in modern Hollow Earth accounts. When such images appear in isolation, they may seem like coincidence or artistic metaphor. But when they align so closely across distant geographies and time periods, they begin to look like fragments of a shared language, a code describing something real but concealed. One of the most striking examples of this coded continuity is the recurring association between underground realms and survival through Cataclysm. In almost every version of the legend, entry into the hidden world comes during a moment of crisis. A great flood, a world engulfing fire, an age of ice, or the collapse of the surface environment. In the Hopi account, the ant people shelter humanity during two world-ending events, teaching them to adapt and endure. In the Andean traditions, survivors of a cosmic flood retreat into the mountain caves under the guidance of Viracocha, the creator god. In parts of Central Asia, legends tell of a chosen few who are led underground during a time of sky fire and emerge generations later to rebuild. The consistency of this theme suggests that the underground world is not simply imagined as a paradise, but as a refuge, a fallback plan for continuity when the surface becomes uninhabitable. This raises the possibility that the Agartha tradition could have its roots in prehistoric survival strategies. During the last ice age, humans already made use of caves for shelter, and some of these caves were vast enough to support communities for extended periods. It is not difficult to imagine that in times of extreme environmental stress, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, severe climate shifts, retreating underground could have been a viable option for survival. Over generations, such a refuge might evolve from a temporary shelter into a permanent, self-sustaining settlement. If that settlement endured long enough and developed advanced techniques for food production, water purification, and energy generation, it could give rise to exactly the kind of advanced subterranean civilization described in the legends. But if such a civilization did develop, why would it remain hidden for thousands of years? One answer often given in esoteric circles is that the inner world exists on a different vibrational frequency than the surface, meaning the two realms are normally out of phase with each other. This idea, while sounding mystical, has a curious parallel in physics: resonance and phase alignment. Two systems can occupy the same space without interacting if they are oscillating at different frequencies. In practical terms, this would mean that the inner and outer worlds could coexist without constant interference, contact occurring only when conditions allow the frequencies to align. While mainstream science does not support the existence of parallel habitats inside the Earth, the metaphor is powerful and consistent enough to be taken seriously within the mythic framework. Modern accounts of alleged encounters sometimes echo this phase shift idea. Explorers speak of walking through ordinary landscapes that suddenly take on an unnatural stillness. No wind, no animal sounds, a strange heaviness in the air, followed by the appearance of features they are certain were not visible before. In some cases, this is accompanied by a distortion of time perception, with minutes stretching into hours, or hours vanishing in what feels like moments. In the context of Agartha lore, these experiences are interpreted as brief overlaps between the two realms, moments when the gates are open and the path is visible. The locations most often associated with such phenomena are remote and difficult to reach. Mount Kailash remains unclimbed and largely untouched, protected both by religious prohibition and by the mountain's own formidable conditions. The vast ice sheets of Antarctica hide entire mountain ranges beneath them, with deep valleys that remain unexplored. In the dense heart of the Amazon, the forest itself acts as a living wall, concealing any features that might lie beneath the canopy. These natural barriers, combined with political restrictions and logistical challenges, mean that even in an age of satellites and global mapping, large portions of the planet remain effectively inaccessible to the public. It is worth noting that in some cases, these inaccessible regions have been the focus of unusual activity. Military expeditions to Antarctica in the mid-20th century were conducted on a scale far greater than most scientific missions, leading some to speculate that their true purpose was more than just research. High-altitude flyovers of the Himalayas have occasionally revealed anomalies, heat signatures in areas that should be frozen solid, or perfectly geometric shapes visible only when the snow recedes. In the Amazon, small aircraft have reported strange compass deviations and transient light domes that appear for seconds before fading. While each of these anomalies can be explained in conventional terms, they fit neatly into the profile of a hidden and guarded network of entrances. The architecture described in Agartha accounts is another repeating detail that invites deeper scrutiny. It is often said to be both monumental and seamless, vast halls carved from single slabs of stone, pillars that rise without joints or mortar, and doorways that appear perfectly proportioned to human form, yet show no signs of hinges or locking mechanisms. In some traditions, these structures are illuminated by walls or ceilings that emit a soft, steady light, bright enough to grow plants but without heat or flicker. Such features may seem fantastical, but they are not beyond the realm of speculative engineering. Light-emitting minerals, advanced crystal technology, and highly polished stone could theoretically create similar effects, especially in a civilization that has had millennia to refine such techniques. If these descriptions have any basis in reality, then it follows that the people of Agartha, or whatever name one chooses, would be masters of environmental control. This mastery would not only make subterranean life possible, it would make it preferable in certain respects. Stable temperatures, protection from surface disasters, and complete control over resources would allow for a level of societal stability that is nearly impossible on the surface. Without the constant threat of famine, flood, or invasion, such a society could direct its energy toward intellectual, artistic, and spiritual pursuits, achieving the kind of balanced governance that Saint-Yves d'Alvidre described in his concept of synarchy, a system where science, religion, and politics operate in harmony. For the surface world, the implications of such a civilization are profound. It would mean that the ultimate archive of human and pre-human history may lie not in dusty museums or fragile digital servers, but in living memory, preserved and curated by a people who have watched our rise and fall from below. Whether they would ever choose to share that knowledge remains an open question, one perhaps answered only when the surface itself faces a crisis that forces the gates to open once again. If the heart of the Agartha legend lies in its role as a sanctuary during catastrophe, then its most provocative aspect may be the suggestion that such catastrophes are not random. In certain traditions, the cycles of destruction and renewal are described with mathematical precision, tied to astronomical events and planetary alignments. The Hindu concept of the yugas, for example, divides cosmic time into vast ages, each with its own characteristics and inevitable decline toward chaos before the cycle begins again. Within this framework, the Kali Yuga, the current Dark Age, is said to end in upheaval, after which the world will be renewed. In the Agartha narrative, these cycles are moments when the inner world becomes most important, either to preserve life until the surface can recover or to guide the survivors in rebuilding. Some esoteric interpretations go further, suggesting that the inhabitants of the inner world have an active role in managing these transitions. This is not presented as control in the political sense, but as stewardship, using their knowledge of natural cycles to mitigate the worst effects of disasters or to prepare certain surface populations for survival. This idea echoes the way certain myths depict gods or heroes arriving just before a flood, a fire, or a war, providing warnings or tools that allow a few to endure. The implication is that contact between the two worlds is not constant, but strategic, initiated only when the balance of the planet is at stake. There are modern stories that seem to fit this pattern, though they are shrouded in secrecy and rumor. One often repeated, but never officially confirmed, account involves a team of scientists in the 1960s who were studying unexplained seismic activity beneath a remote mountain range. According to the leaked version of events, their instruments picked up rhythmic pulses coming from deep underground, far too regular to be natural earthquakes. The pulses stopped abruptly after several days, just before a major volcanic eruption in a nearby region. The official report made no mention of these signals, but those familiar with the incident speculated that the pulses were intentional, either a form of communication or an attempt to stabilize the geological instability before it reached the surface. In the context of Agartha, such an intervention would be entirely in character. Legends often depict the inner world as technologically advanced, not only in the sense of machines, but in mastery over energy systems that interact directly with the Earth's magnetic and gravitational fields. This could allow them to manipulate tectonic stresses, control volcanic activity, or influence weather patterns. While this might sound like science fiction, modern research into geoengineering and climate modification shows that humanity itself is beginning to experiment with large-scale environmental influence, albeit in a crude and often controversial way. If an older civilization had been perfecting such abilities for millennia, the results could appear to us as nothing short of miraculous. The question then becomes, if such a civilization exists and can intervene, why allow disasters to occur at all? The answer, according to some interpretations, lies in the balance between guidance and autonomy. Too much interference would make the surface dependent, stunting its growth and preventing it from developing resilience. In this view, catastrophe is not solely destructive. It is also a catalyst for transformation, forcing societies to adapt, innovate, and sometimes evolve in ways they would not under constant protection. Agartha's role, then, would not be to prevent all harm, but to preserve the possibility of recovery, ensuring that the seeds of renewal survive even in the harshest conditions. Evidence for this kind of selective interaction is, of course, circumstantial at best. But there are intriguing patterns in the historical record where certain technologies or ideas appear suddenly without a clear chain of development. The agricultural revolution, the invention of metallurgy, and the sudden rise of written language in multiple parts of the world are often explained as inevitable outcomes of human progress. Yet, in the Agartha framework, they could also be seen as moments when knowledge was seeded from below, delivered to the surface at times when the conditions were right for it to take root. Even the arts and philosophies that shape civilizations might fit into this pattern. The sudden flowering of Greek philosophy in the classical period, the advanced astronomical knowledge of the Maya, the precise mathematical systems of ancient India, these could be interpreted not as isolated bursts of genius, but as evidence of contact, brief openings in the barrier between worlds when information was exchanged. The guardianship that so often accompanies the Agartha myth would then extend not just to physical entrances, but to the flow of knowledge itself. ensuring that what is shared is both timely and proportionate. The modern era presents new challenges to this balance. With the advent of global communication, space exploration, and deep Earth sensing technologies, humanity has reached a level of capability that makes total concealment more difficult. If Agartha is real, its inhabitants would need to adapt their strategies, possibly moving entrances, increasing the sophistication of camouflage, or shifting their interaction toward more subtle channels. It is possible that certain modern myths, UFO sightings, mysterious disappearances, unexplained phenomena, are byproducts of these adaptations, misinterpreted by a surface culture that lacks the context to understand them. The Antarctic connection is especially relevant here. The continent's vast, ice-covered expanse remains one of the least explored regions on Earth, and its potential to conceal massive subterranean systems is unmatched. Satellite imagery has revealed unusual formations, rectilinear shapes beneath the ice, anomalies in surface temperature, and, in rare cases, what appear to be vast openings at ground level. These images often disappear from public access or are explained away as natural features, yet they fuel speculation that Antarctica may be the most heavily guarded gateway to the inner world. The secrecy surrounding military and research installations there only deepens the intrigue. In South America, the Amazon rainforest serves a similar role. The sheer density and hostility of the environment make exploration difficult, and indigenous traditions speak openly of places in the jungle where the earth breathes, and where those who enter uninvited do not return. Expeditions into these areas often encounter inexplicable setbacks, equipment failure, sudden illness, navigational errors that seem disproportionate to the physical challenges. Whether these are natural hazards or deliberate deterrents, the effect is the same. The inner regions remain untouched. The persistence of these inaccessible zones is one of the most compelling circumstantial arguments for Agartha. In a world where satellites can map Mars and autonomous drones can chart the ocean floor, it is telling that large swaths of our own planet remain poorly understood. The official explanations, logistical difficulty, political restriction, environmental protection, are reasonable, but they also align perfectly with what one would expect if such areas were being deliberately shielded. In the end, the investigation circles back to a single point: access. Whether the gates to Agartha are physical doorways, dimensional thresholds, or a combination of both, they remain closed to the vast majority of humanity. The reasons for this, protection, secrecy, readiness, are woven into every version of the legend. And until those reasons change, the mystery will persist, inviting speculation, inspiring exploration, and challenging us to imagine what lies beyond the edges of our known world. Perhaps one day the gates will open, not in a moment of conquest or discovery, but in a moment of mutual recognition, when both worlds are ready to meet as equals. Until then, the story remains where it has always been, in the space between myth and possibility, waiting. One of the most persistent ideas in the Agartha narrative is that the civilization beneath our feet has already interacted with the surface world far more often than we realize. If these encounters have occurred, they have likely been subtle, hidden within events that our history books present as unrelated or even mundane. In this way, the legend paints the inner world not as a place entirely disconnected from us, but as a shadow presence, watching, waiting, and sometimes stepping forward when conditions demand it. This theory gains weight from the way certain breakthroughs in our history appear suddenly, as if dropped into human hands from nowhere. Archaeologists and historians typically attribute these leaps to a combination of necessity, coincidence, and human ingenuity. But the Agartha hypothesis invites us to wonder, what if some of these advances were the result of intentional seeding from an older, more advanced culture within the Earth itself? Consider the sudden precision of ancient megalithic architecture. Stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, quarried miles away, and fitted together with a degree of accuracy that rivals modern engineering, appear in sites from Giza to Sacsayhuaman. The standard explanation is that ancient peoples developed remarkable, now lost construction techniques. Yet in the Agartha framework, these feats could reflect direct guidance from a civilization with far greater mastery of tools, mathematics, and material science. Knowledge offered selectively, perhaps to create surface structures that serve as both cultural monuments and markers for something deeper. In many cases, these sites align with ley lines or magnetic anomalies, features that may point toward their role as part of a global network linked to the inner world. The idea that ancient monuments could function as beacons or waypoints appears in multiple traditions. In Tibetan lore, the positions of certain monasteries are said to mirror constellations, not just for spiritual symbolism, but as part of a navigational map, known only to those with the right training. In South American myth, great stone gateways, such as the Puerta de Hayu Marca, are said to lead to other realms, opening only when activated by a specific object or ritual. These stories are often dismissed as poetic metaphor, yet they share enough common structure to suggest a deeper purpose, one that fits neatly into the hypothesis of concealed entrances and protected access routes. The guardianship theme, which has appeared in every culture's version of the legend, becomes even more intriguing when paired with accounts of unusual encounters in remote regions. In the American West, stories persist of tall, robed figures glimpsed at a distance in desert canyons, vanishing when approached. In the Himalayas, climbers speak of meeting strangers with flawless, ageless features who offer warnings or directions before disappearing into terrain where no trail exists. In the deep Amazon, explorers tell of voices speaking in unknown languages from just out of sight, leading them away from certain areas. While these reports may be the result of stress, fatigue, or imagination, they align closely with the idea of a hidden civilization actively shaping who gets close to its domain. Technology is another area where the Agartha narrative intersects with unexplained phenomena. Some accounts describe the inner world's use of crystal-based energy systems, structures that store and release power drawn from the planet's own fields. This idea has an interesting echo in our own technological history. Ancient cultures across the globe placed high value on quartz and other crystalline minerals, not merely for decoration, but for purposes we do not fully understand. In modern science, crystals have proven essential for everything from timekeeping in quartz watches to storing and transmitting information in computing and telecommunications. The possibility that an advanced subterranean culture could have mastered these properties millennia ago is speculative, but not outside the realm of what physics would allow. The notion of an inner sun is perhaps the most dramatic and controversial detail in the Hollow Earth tradition. In this model, the planet's interior contains a luminous core, not the molten iron sphere described by mainstream geology, but a smaller, suspended sun-like body whose light sustains a thriving ecosystem. Proponents argue that such a system could produce stable, mild climates and support abundant plant and animal life without dependence on the surface sun. Skeptics counter that no known process could create such a stable, floating light source. Yet here again, the legends are persistent and global, with parallels in Norse, Hindu, and Native American traditions describing a light or fire at the heart of the world. If symbolic, the inner sun could represent knowledge, life force, or spiritual illumination. If literal, it would represent a phenomenon beyond our current scientific models. The difficulty in investigating any of these claims lies in the fact that direct evidence is absent or inaccessible. When anomalies are found, be they strange seismic readings, unexplained magnetic shifts, or odd formations in satellite imagery, they are quickly categorized as natural phenomena. While this is often the most reasonable conclusion, the cumulative effect of so many unresolved anomalies begins to strain the limits of coincidence. And if one accepts even the possibility that an advanced civilization has been actively concealing its presence, then the lack of clear evidence becomes less surprising. A society capable of thriving undetected for thousands of years would also be capable of masking its traces from the relatively young and clumsy tools of surface science. This brings the investigation to a philosophical crossroads. The Agartha hypothesis challenges us to consider that our map of the world may be incomplete, not because we lack the means to fill it in, but because someone, or something, has chosen to leave certain areas blank. This would mean that our understanding of the planet is not simply limited by technology or exploration, but by access itself. In that scenario, every expedition that fails, every image that is lost, and every anomalous reading that is set aside could be part of a deliberate strategy. 1,000 small acts of concealment, ensuring that the inner and outer worlds remain separate until both are ready for contact. The question of readiness looms over the entire legend. What conditions would need to be met for the gates to open? Many versions point to moral and spiritual maturity, humanity learning to balance technology with wisdom, ambition with humility. Others emphasize ecological stability, suggesting that the inner world will not reveal itself until the surface proves it can care for its environment without exploitation. Still others tie the timing to cosmic cycles, implying that the decision is less about human choice and more about universal timing. These conditions are not mutually exclusive. Indeed, in some traditions, they are intertwined, with spiritual awakening leading to ecological stewardship, which in turn aligns with cosmic events. Until those conditions are met, if they ever are, Agartha remains a mirror as much as a mystery. It reflects our hopes for a wiser, more harmonious society, our fear of the unknown, and our fascination with the idea that we are not alone in shaping the fate of our world. Whether it exists as a physical place, a parallel dimension, or a powerful metaphor, its endurance in human storytelling speaks to something deep within us. The sense that there is more to this planet than meets the eye, and that the greatest secrets may be hidden not in the stars above, but in the depths below our own feet. In trying to understand why Agartha, if it exists, would maintain such an extraordinary veil of secrecy, it becomes clear that this is not simply about hiding a location. It is about controlling the flow of influence between two worlds. In every culture's version of the story, the hidden realm is depicted as advanced, harmonious, and deeply protective of its independence. The surface, by contrast, is portrayed as chaotic, ambitious, and often destructive. This contrast alone is enough to explain why contact would be limited. For the inner world, remaining hidden is not merely a matter of survival. It is a matter of preserving a way of life that has endured for thousands of years without the constant disruptions that define our history. Legends often suggest that Agartha is not static. It changes, adapts, and even relocates parts of itself when necessary. If its entrances are scattered across the globe, from the Himalayas to the Amazon, from Antarctica to the deserts of Egypt, then its cities may also shift over time, either by expanding existing spaces or creating entirely new ones deeper underground. Such mobility would make it even harder to locate. In certain esoteric accounts, the inner world is described as layered, with older cities abandoned and new ones built in safer or more strategic locations. These ghost cities are said to be avoided by current inhabitants, either because they are unstable or because they serve as decoys for anyone who stumbles too close. There is also the possibility that Agartha is not a single, unified civilization, but a network of cultures that share certain principles while maintaining their own territories. This idea appears in some interpretations of Tibetan and Hindu cosmology, where the subterranean realms are divided into multiple kingdoms, each with its own rulers and specialties. One might excel in spiritual knowledge, another in engineering, another in agriculture or medicine. In this framework, Agartha becomes a collective term for a federation of inner worlds, much like how the surface world refers to a vast array of nations, languages, and systems. If this is true, the politics of contact would be even more complex, with decisions requiring consensus across diverse and possibly competing interests. The technology attributed to Agartha in many accounts suggests an almost seamless integration of science and what we would call the mystical. Energy is drawn from the Earth's own fields, transmitted without wires, and used to power lighting, transportation, and environmental regulation. Architecture is not imposed on the landscape, but grown from it, shaped to fit the natural forms of stone and crystal. Transportation is described as silent and smooth, often using magnetic levitation or systems of tunnels where vehicles move without visible propulsion. While these details may sound like embellishments, they align with certain principles in modern physics and engineering. Principles we have only begun to explore. The difference is that in the inner world's telling, these technologies are used in balance with ecological systems, not in competition with them. One of the most intriguing recurring details is the role of water. In many legends, subterranean rivers and lakes are central to life in the inner world. These waters are often described as exceptionally pure, rich in minerals, and sometimes luminous. In some accounts, the glow comes from bioluminescent organisms. In others, it is a property of the water itself, infused with energy from the inner sun or crystal formations. This focus on water is more than symbolic. If the inner world truly exists, controlling water sources would be essential for long-term survival, agriculture, and industry. It would also serve as a natural defense. Any invader from the surface who could not adapt to the unique composition or temperature of these waters might find survival impossible. The presence of advanced agriculture is another repeating theme. In Agarthan lore, crops are grown in soil enriched with mineral deposits under controlled light that can mimic the spectrum of the sun or produce specialized wavelengths for certain plants. The result is food that is more nutrient-dense and resistant to disease than its surface counterpart. Livestock, where mentioned, are bred selectively for health and temperament, without the overproduction or genetic manipulation common in surface farming. The implication is that food production is not driven by profit or volume, but by the goal of sustaining a balanced population indefinitely. If true, this would allow the inner world to maintain independence from the surface indefinitely, without the need for trade or resource extraction. But independence does not necessarily mean isolation. Some traditions claim that a small number of surface dwellers are allowed into Agartha for specific purposes: diplomatic envoys, spiritual seekers, or individuals whose skills are needed for a particular project. These visitors are said to be sworn to secrecy, often returning with altered identities or living out their days in remote areas to avoid unwanted attention. The accounts of such visits vary widely, from elaborate descriptions of cities bathed in perpetual twilight to simple affirmations that the inner world is real but inaccessible. Whether these are genuine testimonies or carefully crafted fabrications, they reinforce the central theme. Agartha chooses when and how it interacts with the surface, and those choices are rare and deliberate. There are also darker strands in the tapestry of the legend. Some versions speak of conflicts between the inner and outer worlds, brief but intense confrontations over territory, resources, or ideology. These stories often end with an agreement to withdraw, reinforcing the idea that contact is dangerous for both sides. In the most dramatic versions, weapons of immense power, capable of causing earthquakes or altering climates, are hinted at but never fully described. Whether these are warnings, exaggerations, or genuine recollections of ancient conflicts, they serve as a reminder that even a peaceful civilization may have the means to defend itself in ways we cannot match. What makes the Agartha narrative so difficult to dismiss outright is not the extravagance of these claims, but the way they are woven into so many independent traditions. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia have preserved similar motifs. The advanced subterranean realm, the guarded entrances, the role as a refuge in times of disaster, and the selective sharing of knowledge. This level of cross-cultural consistency is rare, and when it does occur, it usually points to a shared historical experience, something real enough to leave an imprint on the collective memory, even if the details have been shaped by time and interpretation. If Agartha is a metaphor, it is an unusually persistent one, capable of adapting to new contexts while retaining its core identity. If it is real, it is perhaps the most skillfully hidden civilization in human history. Either way, it challenges us to reconsider what we think we know about our planet and our place in it. The surface world prides itself on its progress, its ability to explore space, map the oceans, and peer into the atomic heart of matter. Yet the idea that a realm of such depth and complexity could exist just beneath us and remain unseen reminds us that our understanding is far from complete. And perhaps that is the greatest value of the legend, not in proving or disproving its literal truth, but in keeping alive the possibility that the world still holds secrets vast enough to change everything we know. One of the more puzzling aspects of the Agartha narrative is the way it blurs the boundary between physical geography and altered perception. In many accounts, finding an entrance is not merely a matter of reaching a set of coordinates. It is about being in the right state of mind, body, and perhaps even spirit. This is not just mysticism. It is a recurring detail that appears in Tibetan Buddhist teachings, in Native American initiation stories, and in the testimonies of modern explorers who claim to have stumbled upon something inexplicable. They speak of landscapes shifting subtly around them, of paths appearing where none existed, of a sudden sense of being observed not by a person, but by the land itself. In these moments, they say, the environment seems to respond to them, as though weighing their intentions before allowing them to go further. If this is merely psychological, it is remarkably consistent across cultures. In shamanic traditions from the Amazon to Siberia, the idea is the same. The gateway to the hidden world cannot be forced open by willpower alone. It opens in response to readiness, which is measured not by physical strength or tools, but by the alignment of one's inner state. This concept has an interesting parallel in the modern idea of secure access in technology. Systems that require not just the correct password, but multiple forms of authentication, each confirming that the user is authorized. In the Agartha framework, the password is intention, and the authentication is the alignment of mind and spirit. Without these, the gate remains invisible, or if visible, impenetrable. Such an idea naturally frustrates the modern explorer. We are accustomed to challenges that yield to skill, endurance, and technology. The notion that there might be places on Earth where none of these suffice, that entry is contingent on something intangible, goes against the grain of our scientific mindset. Yet the history of exploration is filled with examples of thresholds that cannot be crossed without meeting certain conditions, whether they are environmental, political, or cultural. Sacred sites often require rituals before entry. Restricted zones require permits and escorts. If the inner world is real, it may simply be following the same logic on a scale we cannot override. The architecture of the entrances, as described in various legends, reinforces this blend of the physical and the perceptual. Some are said to resemble natural formations, caves, cliffs, valleys, that only reveal their true function at specific times of year, when the sun or moon casts light at the right angle. Others are more overt, carved stone portals covered in inscriptions or symbols whose meanings have been lost on the surface. In a few stories, the gateway is not horizontal but vertical, a shaft plunging deep into the earth, its walls smooth as if polished by machinery, ending in a light that seems both distant and impossibly near. These descriptions may sound fantastical, but they align with a long human tradition of building monumental thresholds, from the gates of ancient cities to the megalithic stone circles whose alignments track the movements of the heavens. The role of sound in accessing these entrances is another intriguing detail. In multiple traditions, specific tones, chants, or instruments are said to unlock the path. Tibetan horns, Aboriginal didgeridoos, Native American flutes, each produces a deep, resonant vibration that travels through the ground as much as through the air. Modern science recognizes that sound waves can affect physical matter, from shattering glass to altering the patterns of sand on a vibrating plate. If certain structures in the inner world are designed to respond to particular frequencies, then sound could indeed function as a key, opening passages not through mechanical force, but through resonance. The fact that this idea appears in widely separated cultures hints at either a shared ancient origin or a universal human intuition about the relationship between sound and structure. Accounts from those who claim to have entered Agartha, though rare and unverifiable, share a surprising level of detail. They describe air that is fresh yet subtly different, as though richer in certain elements. The light, they say, has no clear source. It is ambient, diffuse, casting no shadows and maintaining a constant brightness akin to late afternoon on the surface. The temperature is stable, neither hot nor cold, and there is an absence of wind or storms. The cities are often depicted as blending seamlessly with the surrounding environment, their buildings integrated into hillsides, cliffs, or crystal formations. Streets are clean, not because of constant maintenance, but because waste is eliminated at the point of creation, never accumulating. These features, if true, suggest a civilization that has mastered sustainability on a level the surface world still struggles to achieve. The people of Agartha, in these accounts, are described as physically similar to humans but taller, with an almost luminous quality to their skin. Their clothing is simple yet finely made, often in flowing designs that allow ease of movement. Communication is said to occur not only through speech, but through a kind of direct thought exchange, telepathy in modern terms, which allows for the sharing of complex ideas without misunderstanding. Whether literal or metaphorical, this detail emphasizes the theme of harmony and clarity, both within the individual and in society as a whole. In the most elaborate versions, visitors are shown vast halls of knowledge, libraries not of paper or digital screens, but of living records. These records are sometimes described as crystalline structures that can be touched to reveal information directly to the mind, bypassing the need for reading. Others speak of pools of water that, when looked into, display scenes from history or possible futures. Such imagery blurs the line between advanced technology and what we might call magic, though the distinction may be meaningless in a civilization that has integrated the two seamlessly. The question of why such a place would remain hidden, given its apparent abundance and stability, returns again and again. The answer offered by the legends is both simple and sobering. The surface world is not ready. Readiness is defined not by the absence of war or poverty, but by the ability to engage with knowledge and power without corruption. History has shown, time and again, that when advanced technologies fall into unprepared hands, they are used for domination rather than for balance. In this light, Agartha's secrecy becomes not a denial, but a form of guardianship, ensuring that what they have built is not undone by the very impulses that have destabilized the surface for millennia. This idea, that the gates will open only when we have proven ourselves, may sound idealistic, but it is consistent with patterns of selective contact in human history. Societies have always guarded their most valuable resources, whether they are physical treasures, sacred sites, or critical knowledge, sharing them only when trust has been established. In the Agartha narrative, the stakes are simply higher, the scale larger, and the time frame longer. The gates, whether literal or symbolic, are waiting. The question is not whether we can find them, but whether we can meet the conditions to be invited through. Until that happens, the entrances will remain hidden in plain sight. marked in ancient stories, hinted at in unexplained phenomena, and glimpsed in moments when the boundary between worlds thins just enough for a shadow, a sound, or a shaft of light to suggest what lies beyond. For now, those moments are all we have, fragments of a puzzle that may take generations to solve. But perhaps that is the point. The search for Agartha is as much about transforming ourselves as it is about finding a place. And in that transformation, the line between seeker and citizen of the hidden world may begin to blur. The deeper one explores the Agartha narrative, the more it becomes clear that the legend is not confined to one geography, one people, or even one version of human history. It stretches across continents like a subterranean thread, weaving together fragments of myth, anomalous reports, and whispered accounts from explorers who claim to have come too close. What is striking is that the essence of the story remains consistent even when the surface details change. The entrances may be set in icy mountains, desert plateaus, or dense jungles. The inhabitants may be described as ancient humans, luminous beings, or hybrid descendants of a lost civilization. The purpose of their realm may be framed as refuge, archive, or spiritual sanctuary. Yet beneath these variations lies the same core, a hidden world, older than recorded history, surviving in deliberate separation from the surface. One recurring motif is that of the first contact moment, whether in the distant past or in the imagined future. In some traditions, it is said that the surface and inner worlds once interacted freely, exchanging knowledge and goods through portals known to both. These were not secret in the modern sense, but sacred, spaces where the worlds met in mutual respect. The fall of this openness is attributed to a betrayal, a misuse of knowledge, or a war whose details have faded into symbolic allegory. After that, the gates were closed, and the inner world withdrew, leaving only a chosen few on the surface who still knew the locations and the conditions for entry. The parallels to myths of a lost golden age are obvious, but here the loss is not cosmic or divine, it is physical and perhaps reversible. This framework gives rise to the idea that the reopening of the gates is not an accident waiting to happen, but a planned event, triggered by a specific set of criteria. In certain prophecies, particularly those circulating in Tibetan, Andean, and Hopi traditions, the timing of this event is tied to celestial alignments, the movement of certain stars or planets into rare configurations. In these narratives, the heavens act as a clock, and when the moment comes, those who are prepared will be able to cross over. This does not necessarily mean that all humanity will be invited. In many versions, the opportunity will be limited to individuals or groups who have reached the necessary balance of wisdom, humility, and responsibility. Such prophecies blend the cosmic and the personal, implying that readiness is measured both on the scale of civilizations and within the heart of each seeker. Modern technology adds an intriguing layer to this conversation. Satellite imagery, thermal scans, and ground-penetrating radar have revealed anomalies that match the kinds of structures or voids described in the legends. These findings are often explained in geological terms: lava tubes, fault lines, or unusual mineral formations, but the locations are sometimes suspiciously aligned with the traditional sites of hidden entrances. In Antarctica, for example, images have circulated of vast symmetrical openings in the ice, large enough to admit aircraft. While official explanations describe them as natural caves or melt zones, The proximity of these features to areas under strict military control keeps speculation alive. In the Himalayas, thermal imaging has identified warm pockets within glacial regions that should be uniformly frozen, raising questions about the source of the heat. Then there are the cultural anomalies, moments when ancient traditions seem to have knowledge of geography or science far beyond their supposed capabilities. The ancient Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, contain descriptions of aerial craft and advanced weaponry, as well as detailed accounts of subterranean cities inhabited by Nagas and other non-human beings. In Mesoamerica, Mayan and Aztec myths speak of underworld journeys not as metaphors for death, but as literal travels to other realms, complete with descriptions of their landscapes and rulers. In the Norse sagas, the dark elven realm of Svartalfheim is described with architectural and technological sophistication, suggesting that even in the cold north, the concept of an advanced underground world was deeply rooted. One cannot overlook the role of indigenous knowledge in preserving these threads. In many cases, tribal elders speak of the hidden world not as a myth, but as a matter-of-fact reality, cautioning outsiders to respect its boundaries. The Hopi, for instance, speak of their emergence from the underground after being sheltered through cataclysms, and maintain ceremonies that acknowledge their ongoing connection to those who remained below. In the Australian Aboriginal tradition, the dream time includes journeys to and from places within the earth where ancestral beings continue to shape the world. These narratives are not presented as allegory. They are woven into the living culture as an accepted truth. The idea of layered worlds, surface, subsurface, and perhaps even deeper realms, invites speculation about how these domains interact. If the inner world has been observing us, as many legends claim, then it must have a means of doing so without being seen in return. Some accounts suggest the use of observation chambers positioned near entrances, where inhabitants can study the surface world discreetly. Others describe emissaries who can move among us unnoticed, blending in physically, but carrying knowledge and skills far beyond what is common. These emissaries are sometimes said to influence events subtly, nudging humanity toward certain outcomes without revealing their origin. In the context of such influence, one must consider the possibility that the Agartha narrative has been deliberately cultivated in surface culture. By allowing hints of the hidden world to persist through myths, art, and unexplained events, the inner world may be shaping our perception, preparing us for eventual contact while also testing our reactions. If the legend inspires curiosity, humility, and a desire for harmony, then perhaps we are moving closer to readiness. If it provokes greed, exploitation, or fear, then the gates remain closed. In this way, the story itself becomes part of the process, a mirror reflecting our collective state. Of course, the skeptic will point out that such ideas are unfalsifiable, immune to proof or disproof. This is true, but it is also the nature of deep mysteries. The absence of definitive evidence does not erase the patterns, nor does it diminish the cultural weight of a legend that has persisted for thousands of years. Instead, it challenges us to look more carefully at the convergence of myth and observation, to recognize that not all truths are revealed through direct measurement. Some are approached slowly through layers of story, symbol, and subtle experience. The investigation, then, becomes a kind of dialogue, not just between the seeker and the landscape, but between the seeker and the legend itself. Every expedition, every new anomaly, every retelling of the myth adds another thread to the tapestry. Whether that tapestry depicts a real place or an enduring vision of what humanity hopes to become is, in the end, a question only the gates can answer. And perhaps that is why the legend continues to pull us forward, because it offers not just the promise of discovery, but the possibility that the act of seeking will change us into the kind of people who deserve to find what lies beyond. The concept of Agartha, for all its mystery, refuses to exist in isolation from other great enigmas of our past. As researchers, both academic and independent, compare notes, patterns begin to emerge that link the hidden world narrative to some of the most puzzling anomalies on the surface. Ancient megalithic structures, for instance, often appear at locations that align not only with astronomical markers, but also with clusters of underground cavities or unexplained magnetic anomalies. In South America, certain Incan and pre-Incan sites are built upon or adjacent to vast tunnel systems, some stretching for miles with walls so smooth they seem machined rather than carved by hand. Local oral traditions insist these tunnels connect to deeper regions, places where the sun shines from the stone, a poetic description that resonates uncannily with accounts of the inner world's ambient light. Similar patterns appear in Egypt, where beneath the Giza Plateau, stories of vast subterranean complexes persist despite decades of official silence. Ancient texts, such as the Inventory, Stela, hint at structures beneath the pyramids that predate the reigns of the pharaohs themselves. In the early 20th century, explorers and workers claimed to have entered chambers deep below ground, encountering corridors that seemed to stretch far beyond the excavated areas. While official archaeology explains most of these as storage or ritual spaces, the scale and precision of some tunnels remain difficult to reconcile with known construction techniques of the era. This is especially so when they exhibit characteristics, such as vitrified walls, that suggest exposure to intense heat or advanced stoneworking methods not accounted for in the historical record. In Asia, the legends of Shambala overlap with the Agartha motif in intriguing ways. Tibetan lamas have long spoken of a hidden kingdom, accessible through mountain passes known only to those who are spiritually prepared. Unlike the Western tendency to frame Shambhala as purely metaphorical, certain lamas insist it is as real as any physical country, with its own cities, agriculture, and governance. The path to reach it is said to require not just navigation through treacherous terrain, but the performance of specific mantras and rituals designed to align the traveler's consciousness with the frequency of the place. This echoes the earlier notion that access to the inner world is as much about inner transformation as outer exploration. In North America, Native American tribes from the Hopi to the Lakota recount emergence myths in which their ancestors came up from a subterranean refuge after a time of great destruction. These stories do not depict the refuge as a crude shelter, but as a well-ordered realm where life was sustained until the surface became habitable again. The Hopi specifically describe being guided by the ant people, beings who taught them how to live below ground and survive through cataclysms. The physical description of these ant people, tall, thin, with large eyes adapted to low light, has led some to draw parallels with other global myths of underground dwellers. though in the Hopi tradition, they are benevolent teachers rather than conquerors or deceivers. One cannot dismiss the Antarctic connection, either. The frozen continent, mostly unexplored beneath its miles-thick ice, has been the subject of persistent rumors about warm areas, hidden entrances, and structures detected by radar that do not match natural geological formations. In 1947, Admiral Richard E. Byrd's Operation High Jump fueled speculation when his reports hinted at vast new territory beyond the pole, territory that could sustain life. While mainstream historians attribute his words to geographical misunderstandings or military secrecy, enthusiasts point to them as yet another fragment in the Agartha mosaic. If an entrance exists there, the remoteness and harsh conditions would make it the perfect place for a civilization intent on maintaining privacy. The question of technology remains central to the plausibility of Agartha. If such a civilization exists and has endured for millennia, what kind of energy systems, architecture, and social organization would sustain it? The legends suggest solutions that are both elegantly simple and impossibly advanced. Energy is said to be drawn from natural sources: geothermal heat, the steady currents of underground rivers, and perhaps even from the Earth's electromagnetic field itself. Architecture blends seamlessly with the environment, using materials that self-repair or resist decay, eliminating the need for constant rebuilding. Governance is portrayed as a council-based system where decisions are made through consensus, reducing conflict and fostering long-term stability. These descriptions may sound idealized, but they also reflect principles that modern sustainability advocates are only beginning to implement on the surface. What is perhaps most challenging for the surface dweller to grasp is the reported absence of scarcity. In a realm where food, water, and shelter are abundant by design, the social dynamics shift dramatically. Competition for resources, the root of so many surface conflicts, becomes irrelevant. Without scarcity, the incentives that drive greed, corruption, and war dissolve. This raises the possibility that the inner world has not only survived by hiding, but has thrived by creating an environment that removes the very triggers of collapse. If such a model were possible above ground, the implications for our civilization would be transformative. But perhaps this is precisely why the gates remain closed until we prove capable of adopting such principles. Critics argue that all of this is an elaborate tapestry woven from human imagination, a patchwork of myths projected onto the unknown. And yet, the persistence of specific details, ambient light without a visible source, tall inhabitants with advanced knowledge, vast halls of records, across cultures that never had contact raises a question that skepticism alone cannot fully silence. If these are merely dreams, why do they dream alike? If these are just stories, why do they align so precisely in themes, imagery, and even geography? Such consistency hints at a shared origin, whether in distant human memory or in encounters that have been quietly recorded in the fabric of culture. The search for Agartha, then, becomes more than a physical expedition. It is a test of perception, discernment, and readiness. Every anomaly, be it a magnetic fluctuation in the Andes, a thermal hotspot in the Himalayas, or a forgotten tunnel under an ancient city, becomes a piece of evidence in a case that will never be fully closed until someone steps through and returns with proof. Until then, the legend functions as both a lure and a filter, drawing in the persistent, the curious, and the humble, while frustrating the impatient and the arrogant. And perhaps that is the design, for only those who approach with the right blend of determination and reverence are likely to find what they seek. In the end, whether Agartha is a literal civilization beneath our feet or a metaphor for the highest potential of humanity, its pull remains undeniable. It invites us to imagine a world free from the cycles of destruction that have defined so much of our history, to believe in the possibility of harmony sustained over millennia. That vision alone is powerful enough to guide the choices of those who take it seriously. And if somewhere, far below, the gates truly exist, perhaps the act of striving toward that vision is the very thing that will one day cause them to open. If Agartha exists as more than myth, then its concealment has required a level of intentionality far beyond simple geographical isolation. Across centuries, the world above has expanded its maps, crossed oceans, flown over polar caps, and even launched satellites into orbit. Yet no definitive, publicly acknowledged evidence of the inner realm has surfaced. This suggests not merely remoteness, but active measures to remain unseen. Legends often describe a system of guardians, not mythical monsters, but highly trained sentinels whose task is to protect the entrances and ensure that only the worthy pass through. In various traditions, these guardians appear under different guises: Tibetan adepts, Amazonian shamans, desert mystics. Yet the function is the same: to evaluate the intent of those who approach and to turn back the unprepared. Such guardianship may not always be direct. In some accounts, travelers who come too close to an entrance experience sudden disorientation, lost time, or an inexplicable urge to turn back. This has led some researchers to speculate about defensive technologies that manipulate perception. What, in modern terms, might be called psychological deterrence or electromagnetic interference. The idea may sound fanciful, but similar effects have been documented in natural contexts, such as the confusion and nausea some people experience in areas of strong geomagnetic fluctuation. If such a phenomenon were deliberately harnessed, it could form a nearly invisible barrier without the need for physical walls. The terrain around many alleged entrances adds another layer of difficulty. These places are often located in zones prone to extreme weather, treacherous cliffs, or deep within labyrinthine cave systems. In some cases, they are also within restricted territories, military zones, protected heritage sites, or regions controlled by governments with limited access to outsiders. Whether this is coincidence or part of a larger strategy is open to interpretation, but the result is the same. The combination of physical, psychological, and bureaucratic barriers makes casual discovery nearly impossible. One must either possess insider knowledge or dedicate years to meticulous investigation to even approach the threshold. Then there is the question of why the inner world would remain hidden at all. The most common explanation, offered both in myth and modern speculation, is that the surface world is not yet ready. This readiness is often defined not in terms of technology or material advancement, but in moral and ethical maturity. The inner realm is portrayed as a society that has resolved many of the issues: greed, environmental destruction, perpetual conflict that continue to plague the surface. From their perspective, revealing themselves prematurely could risk contamination of their way of life, or worse, exploitation by those who see them as a resource to be mined rather than a civilization to be respected. Some narratives suggest that selective contact does occur, but it is carefully managed. Individuals are chosen for their qualities, curiosity balanced with humility, courage tempered with restraint, and are invited in for specific purposes, whether to learn, to deliver messages, or to carry back knowledge when the time is right. These accounts are often dismissed as unverified personal testimonies, yet they share remarkable consistencies. Descriptions of architecture, for example, speak of structures that blend into the natural rock, with walls that seem alive, shifting subtly in color and texture like the skin of a living organism. Lighting is described as ambient, with no visible source, as if the very air glows. The inhabitants are often depicted as taller than the average human, with features that are both familiar and subtly different. Eyes that seem to hold more light, postures of effortless balance. These stories raise a possibility that challenges conventional thinking. What if the inhabitants of Agartha are not simply our equals in biology, but an evolved branch of humanity, or even a separate species that shares our origin? Some theorists propose that they may be survivors of a civilization predating known history, forced underground by cataclysmic events such as asteroid impacts, pole shifts, or sudden climate collapse. In this view, they represent a living time capsule, preserving knowledge and genetic diversity lost to the surface. Others push further, suggesting that their origin may not be entirely terrestrial, that they could be the descendants of an ancient contact between humanity and a non-human intelligence, whether from the stars or from dimensions we barely comprehend. Such ideas inevitably attract skepticism, yet they also explain certain persistent elements in global mythologies. The recurring image of teachers descending from the sky or emerging from the earth to guide early humans could be reinterpreted not as separate stories, but as different cultural memories of the same event. The reason these beings vanish after a time, promising to return, may be simply that they withdrew to their hidden realm, awaiting the right conditions for re-engagement. In this sense, Agartha becomes not only a place, but a recurring actor in human history, stepping in at critical junctures to offer course corrections before fading again into legend. The question of what lies within its halls of knowledge is perhaps the most tantalizing. Myths speak of great libraries or archives containing the history of the world, not as scattered and fragmented as ours, but as a continuous record stretching back to the earliest ages. This would include not only written texts, but devices that allow one to witness events as they happened, bypassing the distortions of memory or interpretation. Some even describe living records, individuals whose task is to carry vast amounts of history within their own minds, ready to share it through direct thought-to-thought communication. Such abilities may sound mythical, but the concept of knowledge preserved and transmitted without degradation is a goal our own technology strives for, whether through digital storage or artificial intelligence. Energy systems, too, are said to be fundamentally different from ours. Rather than burning fuel or splitting atoms, Agarthan technology is often described as drawing from the natural rhythms of the Earth, geothermal currents, tidal forces, or subtle interactions with the planet's magnetic field. This would provide not only sustainability, but also independence from the fragile supply chains and political tensions that define our energy use. In this way, their concealment may be as much a practical necessity as a philosophical choice. Remaining hidden allows them to maintain their way of life without interference from a surface world still tangled in resource scarcity. Yet the most compelling part of the legend is not its technological marvels, but its vision of human potential. In nearly every telling, the inner world is free of many of the flaws that have repeatedly undermined surface civilizations. There is a sense of balance between individual freedom and communal responsibility, between technological advancement and environmental stewardship, between knowledge and wisdom. Whether or not Agartha is real in a geographic sense, the model it represents exerts a powerful pull on the imagination. It challenges us to consider what we might become if we overcame the patterns that have led to so many rises and falls. In that light, the search for Agartha is as much about self-discovery as it is about finding a hidden city. To pursue it seriously is to engage with the question of whether we are capable of living in the kind of harmony we so often romanticize. It asks us to prove, perhaps to unseen watchers, that we can be trusted with the knowledge and freedoms that such a place might offer. And if the gates are indeed real, hidden in some remote and well-guarded location, perhaps they are waiting not for the right coordinates to be found, but for the right kind of people to arrive. In pursuing the possibility of Agartha, one must also confront the uneasy truth that if such a civilization exists, there are likely those on the surface who already know of it and are actively ensuring that the knowledge remains contained. Whistleblowers, explorers, and researchers have long hinted at suppressed expeditions, classified findings, and encounters buried under layers of official denial. Some of the most persistent rumors involve archaeological digs that abruptly halted without explanation, with artifacts vanishing into private collections or government vaults. Former military personnel have spoken, often anonymously, of being stationed near remote areas rumored to hide entrances, instructed to turn away any unauthorized presence under the pretext of protecting environmental research zones or national security installations. 4. Whether these claims are exaggerations born of suspicion or fragments of a genuine cover-up, they reinforce the notion that something beyond ordinary geography is at stake. If this is true, then the surface powers have their reasons. To disclose the existence of an advanced inner civilization could destabilize economies, religious frameworks, and geopolitical structures overnight. The mere proof of an unbroken lineage of human or quasi-human culture, more ancient and sophisticated than our own, would force a rewriting of history on a scale few institutions are prepared to manage. Entire academic disciplines would have to confront the collapse of their foundational timelines, and the public, already prone to division, might fracture further between those who see such beings as saviors and those who view them as threats. The calculated decision to withhold such information from this perspective becomes less about malicious control and more about managing the shock to a civilization not yet prepared to absorb it. However, this veil of secrecy also fuels the very curiosity it seeks to contain. In the absence of official acknowledgement, independent investigators comb through anomalies, unexplained aerial images, unusual geological surveys, fragments of oral history that point to specific coordinates. These pursuits, often ridiculed in mainstream channels, sometimes yield compelling data. Magnetic field irregularities recorded in certain mountainous regions match descriptions in ancient texts that speak of shifting skies and whispering stones. Seismic readings detect hollow chambers far larger than any known natural caves, positioned beneath sites of ceremonial significance. While skeptics can and do propose natural explanations, the confluence of myth, measurement, and mystery keeps the embers of possibility alive. There is also the question of how the inner world might view the surface. If they are aware of us, and most legends imply they are, then they have been watching our civilizations rise and fall, perhaps intervening in subtle ways to nudge outcomes. This could explain the occasional leap in technology or social organization in ancient cultures without a clear preceding development. Moments historians call sudden emergences or cultural blooms. In this interpretation, Agartha's people act not as rulers but as gardeners, tending the chaotic surface from a distance, sometimes planting seeds of knowledge, sometimes pruning dangerous growths. It is an image both comforting and unsettling. Comforting in that it implies a benevolent oversight. Unsettling in that it reveals our history may have been guided in ways we neither perceived nor consented to. But what if their perspective is more pragmatic than altruistic? A hidden civilization might watch the surface not out of compassion, but out of self-interest, monitoring us to ensure we do not become a threat to their stability. From this angle, any contact they allow would be limited and carefully calculated, just enough to keep the balance in their favor. We, with our wars, environmental crises, and unpredictable leadership, could be seen as dangerous neighbors, too volatile to interact with directly. This dynamic mirrors the way advanced nations sometimes engage with unstable regions, offering aid but keeping strict boundaries to avoid entanglement in destructive cycles. In examining possible points of contact, one is struck by how often they appear in liminal spaces, places and times that straddle two realities. Twilight hours when light and dark blur, remote valleys where the land folds in on itself, caves where the echo of one's own breath feels like an intruder's whisper. In these transitional zones, countless stories place the moment of encounter. A traveler sees figures that vanish when approached. A lost climber finds themselves guided to safety by strangers who disappear without leaving footprints. Such tales, easy to dismiss as hallucinations or embellishments, gain new weight when they recur across cultures and eras, describing similar physical details: the clothing made of unfamiliar fabrics, the calm but unblinking gaze, the sense that the air itself is denser, charged. For those determined to find Agartha, the path forward is as much an inward journey as an outward one. Legends insist that without a certain inner disposition, patience, humility, and a willingness to listen rather than demand, the physical steps toward the entrance will lead nowhere. Some interpret this as spiritual metaphor, others as literal truth, suggesting that the gateways are keyed to states of consciousness. In this view, one could stand at the very threshold and see nothing but rock if their mind is not tuned to the right frequency. Modern science may scoff at such a notion, yet it has begun to explore how perception is shaped by neurological and electromagnetic conditions, hinting that reality may be less fixed than we assume. Even in the modern age, with satellites mapping every corner of the globe, there remain vast stretches of territory barely touched by human presence, deep in the Amazon, in the frozen reaches of the poles, beneath the Himalayan glaciers. These are places where an entrance, if cleverly disguised, could remain hidden indefinitely. The challenge for seekers is not only to locate these zones, but to survive them long enough to test their theories. Many expeditions have ended in failure, not because they reached a dead end, but because the environment claimed them: disease, weather, accidents. And so the legend endures, reinforced by the very difficulty of pursuit. The enduring appeal of Agartha lies in the way it blends the tangible with the intangible. It is a physical place one could, in theory, walk into, yet it is also a mirror held up to our own civilization, reflecting both what we are and what we might become. The stories suggest a level of harmony, technological integration, and societal stability that we have yet to achieve, and in chasing it, we are really chasing a vision of ourselves perfected. Whether this perfection exists beneath our feet or only in our imagination is, in a sense, secondary to the way it challenges us to evolve. If the gates were to open tomorrow, if emissaries were to step forward and invite us in, the greatest test would not be in finding the courage to enter, but in proving we could stay without bringing the fractures of our own world with us. And perhaps that is why, for now, the entrances remain sealed, the guardians watchful, and the stories just vivid enough to keep us searching. In this way, Agartha continues to function as both mystery and motivation, a hidden horizon that urges us to push further, think deeper, and, whether we know it or not, prepare ourselves for the day we might be welcomed in. If the threads of legend, witness accounts, and subtle physical evidence are woven together, they begin to form a pattern, one that suggests Agartha is not a static relic, but a living, adaptive entity in its own right. Just as ecosystems respond to environmental pressures, a hidden civilization existing for millennia would need to evolve, not in the sense of biological mutation alone, but in governance, culture, and technology. This adaptability could be the very reason it has survived without being consumed by the chaos that has undone so many surface empires. Observers of ancient history often note that civilizations tend to rise on waves of innovation and collapse under the weight of their own excesses: economic overreach, environmental degradation, internal conflict. For Agartha to endure across such cycles, it must have found ways to prevent the tipping point from ever arriving. One key element in these stories is the portrayal of balance, not just ecological balance, though that is central, but a measured relationship between technological capability and human need, unlike the surface, where technological advancement often runs ahead of ethical frameworks, leading to destructive exploitation. Agarthan society is described as allowing its tools to evolve in lockstep with its cultural maturity. A device or method is not adopted simply because it can be built, but because it aligns with long-term well-being. In our own terms, this is like practicing a form of technological restraint, a concept discussed in philosophy but rarely seen in practice. If true, such restraint would explain the absence of the kind of catastrophic accidents, nuclear meltdowns, industrial collapses, that have periodically scarred our history. The inner cities themselves, as depicted in recurring accounts, seem to embody this principle. Architecture appears both monumental and organic, suggesting construction methods that integrate with the surrounding geology rather than displacing it. Walls are said to carry the same mineral composition as the mountains above, yet resonate with a subtle warmth to the touch, as if imbued with stored energy. Light sources, lacking visible fixtures, may be embedded directly into the surfaces, producing an even glow without heat or glare. While skeptics dismiss such descriptions as fantasy, engineers who have studied natural luminescent materials and bioluminescent organisms know that the idea is not beyond theoretical possibility. The inner realm, if it exists, may have long ago mastered energy-efficient illumination without reliance on burning fuels or electrical grids as we know them. Social structure, too, is portrayed differently from the surface norm. Rather than hierarchical power concentrated in a ruling elite, Agarthan governance is often described as a network of councils with representation drawn from various regions or disciplines. Decision-making in this telling is slow by design, prioritizing consensus over expedience. While this might frustrate a surface mindset accustomed to rapid action, it offers resilience. Decisions are less likely to be reversed in panic or made to serve transient interests. Such governance models have parallels in certain indigenous cultures on the surface, where leadership is more a role of stewardship than authority, and where leaders are measured by the stability they maintain rather than the conquests they achieve. Education in this inner society, according to legend, is lifelong and holistic. Children are introduced not only to practical skills, but to disciplines aimed at cultivating empathy, patience, and critical thought. Historical knowledge is presented as a living continuum, connecting the student's own actions to long chains of cause and effect. In this way, history is not a static record of past events, but a tool for forecasting and shaping the future. A culture that teaches each generation to see itself as a custodian of the next would, over time, develop a fundamentally different approach to innovation, conflict resolution, and environmental management than the surface world's more individualistic competitive systems. And yet, for all this idealism, the legends rarely portray Agartha as a utopia free of struggle. Instead, there is an acknowledgement of challenges, conflicts of philosophy, differences in vision, the need to guard against external threats. Some versions of the tale even speak of the Great Departure, an ancient schism in which a faction left the inner world to live on the surface, dissatisfied with the pace of change. These defectors, in certain speculative theories, may have been the seed population for some of the world's earliest high civilizations, carrying fragments of inner-world knowledge into the open air. Over centuries, however, that knowledge was diluted, repurposed, or lost altogether, leaving only architectural wonders and inexplicable artifacts as hints of its origin. The relationship between the two realms, the hidden and the surface, thus becomes not one of complete separation, but of intermittent contact, sometimes intentional, sometimes accidental. Travelers who claim to have entered Agartha often speak of being returned to the surface in ways that suggest careful placement, as if the journey were meant to be remembered but not easily repeated. Time distortion is a common theme. Days felt within the inner world may equate to months or even years outside, or the reverse. Modern physics acknowledges that time can be experienced differently under certain gravitational or relativistic conditions, though not in the precise manner described in folklore. Still, the persistence of this element across multiple traditions invites the question of whether such differences in perception could be engineered intentionally. Communication between realms, if it occurs, is said to be indirect, through symbols, dreams, or the appearance of mysterious objects. A farmer finds an intricately carved stone in a field that had been empty the day before. A scientist dreams of a machine and later discovers the concept exists in obscure historical patents. A child recalls in detail places and events from a life they could not have lived. To the rational mind, these are coincidences or the products of subconscious synthesis. To the seeker, they are breadcrumbs, signs that the boundary between our world and another is porous in ways we do not fully understand. It is also worth noting that Agartha's portrayal has evolved over time in the surface imagination. In the 19th century, Western occultists depicted it as a repository of esoteric wisdom, accessible only to those initiated into secret societies. In the early 20th, it became entwined with the hollow earth theories, blending pseudoscience with adventurous fiction. In the post-war era, as fears of nuclear annihilation grew, it was imagined as a survival vault, housing the remnants of a purer humanity. In the modern age, shaped by environmental crisis and technological acceleration, it is more often envisioned as a model of sustainability and ethical governance. This shifting image may say as much about us as it does about any reality beneath our feet. We project onto the hidden world the qualities we most desire or most fear at a given moment in history. And perhaps that is the true function of the Agartha legend. Whether or not the city itself exists, it serves as a mirror and a challenge. It forces us to confront our own shortcomings by holding up an image of what might be possible if we chose a different path. In imagining a society that has mastered balance, restraint, and continuity, we measure our own instability and impulsiveness. In picturing a realm that thrives in harmony with its environment, we see the contrast with our exploitation of the surface. Even if Agartha is nothing more than a story, the vision it offers is one worth striving toward. But for the most dedicated seekers, the idea remains that the city is real, and that the gates may yet open. Not to all, but to those prepared to walk through them without trying to remake the inner world in the image of the outer. The journey, then, is not merely a matter of maps and expeditions, but of readiness. The legend whispers that the final key is not knowing where the entrance lies, but knowing who you will be when you stand before it. For those who have spent years, sometimes entire lifetimes, chasing the possibility of Agartha, the search becomes a kind of double existence. On the surface, they lead ordinary lives, holding jobs, raising families, engaging in the everyday routines that anchor them to the visible world. But beneath that layer is a parallel reality, one in which every map is a code, every unexplained cave a potential threshold, every fragment of myth a clue waiting to be decoded. This dual awareness can be both exhilarating and isolating, for the seeker must navigate between a society that demands tangible proof and an inner conviction that thrives on the intangible. In the archives of explorers' journals, a repeated theme emerges. The closer one comes to believing they are on the verge of discovery, the more resistance they encounter. Natural, logistical, and human. Natural resistance often takes the form of sudden environmental obstacles. An expedition's equipment fails without clear cause, weather patterns shift violently, or a route mapped just days earlier becomes impassable due to landslides or floods. While some attribute this to coincidence or the inherent unpredictability of remote landscapes, others see it as deliberate, whether engineered by the inner civilization itself or as part of some larger system of protection that keeps unprepared outsiders at bay. This idea aligns with a recurring motif in folklore. The guardian threshold, a concept found in cultures from the Norse sagas to the myths of Polynesia, where access to a sacred realm is always preceded by a trial that tests the traveler's readiness. Logistical resistance can be even more frustrating. Permits are suddenly revoked, funding disappears, or key collaborators withdraw under pressure from unseen influences. Veteran researchers often hint, carefully, that such setbacks are not mere bureaucratic mishaps, but the fingerprints of powerful interests working to keep certain areas off limits. Some whisper of silent corridors in government agencies, divisions that have no public record, yet appear to exercise control over which archaeological findings see the light of day. The mere suggestion of this is enough to draw accusations of conspiracy thinking. And yet, as many seekers note, patterns emerge too consistently to ignore. Human resistance, perhaps the most disheartening, comes from the social sphere. Friends and colleagues grow distant, dismissing the search as obsession or fantasy. Academic peers, fearing reputational damage, avoid association with any project involving Agartha. This isolation can push seekers into echo chambers, where they speak only with those who already share their beliefs. While this solidarity can be comforting, it also risks amplifying unverified claims, making it harder to separate authentic leads from noise. The most disciplined investigators walk a narrow path between skepticism and belief, grounding their work in verifiable data while remaining open to the possibility that not all truths can be measured with our current tools. For those few who claim to have crossed the threshold, whether into a hidden valley, a subterranean hall, or a vast inner city, the return is often marked by a kind of estrangement from the surface world. These individuals describe not just a difference in environment, but a difference in perception, as though the very air within Agartha carried a quality that altered thought and emotion. They speak of colors that seem to hold depth beyond the spectrum visible to the human eye, of sounds that are not merely heard but felt through the bones, of an absence of constant mechanical noise that makes the beating of one's own heart suddenly vivid. While such descriptions defy conventional measurement, they align with known psychological phenomena. Sensory recalibration, for example, which occurs when someone spends extended time in an environment with radically different stimuli. One intriguing detail in many of these accounts is the description of an energy field or vibration that seems to permeate Agartha's spaces. Those inclined toward metaphysics interpret this as a higher frequency of existence, a term used in spiritual traditions to describe states of consciousness associated with clarity, compassion, and heightened awareness. From a more scientific standpoint, it might refer to electromagnetic conditions unlike those on the surface, perhaps linked to geological formations or engineered infrastructure. If such an energy exists, it could be both the source of the city's stability and the reason unprepared visitors are rarely permitted to remain for long. It might simply overwhelm those not acclimated to it. The purpose of Agartha itself remains a matter of speculation. Is it a sanctuary, preserving a lineage of knowledge against surface world instability? Is it a laboratory for social and technological experimentation, with the surface serving as a comparative case study? Or is it, as some suggest, a kind of archive, its population acting less as rulers or scientists and more as stewards of a vast repository of history, art, and science, waiting for the right moment to be revealed? Each possibility carries profound implications. A sanctuary would imply that contact will be limited to protect its inhabitants. A laboratory might suggest occasional interventions in surface affairs, testing outcomes. An archive could mean that disclosure is inevitable, timed to coincide with a crisis or threshold moment in human development. Legends from Tibet, the Andes, and the American Southwest offer hints that contact may already occur on a cyclical basis, marked by rare astronomical alignments or shifts in the Earth's magnetic field. Such moments are said to thin the veil between realms, allowing for brief exchanges of knowledge or presence. In practical terms, this could correspond to natural phenomena, solar activity, geomagnetic storms, that subtly alter human perception and physiology. Ancient cultures, far more attuned to these rhythms than modern urban populations, may have built their ceremonial calendars around them, aligning festivals, pilgrimages, and rituals with times when contact was most likely. Yet even if the means to enter were known, the question remains, should we? The allure of discovery is powerful, but history is filled with examples where contact between disparate cultures led to disaster for one or both. Disease, exploitation, and cultural erasure are the well-documented consequences of such encounters on the surface. If Agartha exists as a closed system, introducing our instability could be catastrophic. The decision to remain hidden might be, from their perspective, an act of preservation not only for themselves, but for us. As one elder in an Amazonian community who spoke of the people under the river is reported to have said, "They do not come because they see we are not ready to stay." This leads to a sobering reflection. The journey to Agartha may not be about finding a physical location at all, but about reaching a point where our civilization embodies the qualities we project onto it. Harmony, balance, restraint, stewardship. These are not coordinates one can mark on a map, but conditions that must be cultivated collectively. In that sense, the search for Agartha mirrors the ancient philosophical quest for the ideal city, whether Plato's Republic or the Buddhist Shambala. Both are less destinations than measures of human readiness. And so, the seekers continue, not only for the thrill of uncovering a hidden world, but for the transformation that occurs in the act of seeking itself. Each failed expedition, each abandoned trail, each fragment of lore forces a re-evaluation, stripping away impatience, sharpening perception, and deepening the resolve to keep going. Whether the final step leads into a vaulted chamber beneath the mountains, or simply into a deeper understanding of our own potential, the journey has meaning. Perhaps, in the end, the legend of Agartha survives because it speaks to something universal. The belief that beyond the horizon of the known, there is a place where we could live better, not through conquest or wealth, but through understanding. It is a promise and a challenge, calling us to become the kind of people who, if the gates were to open, could walk through without breaking what we find. As the search for Agartha draws toward its imagined horizon, one begins to realize that every path, whether through desert, jungle, ice, or stone, leads ultimately back to the seeker's own threshold. This is not to diminish the physical journeys, for they carry their own value. Months spent tracing forgotten riverbeds, nights spent in the uneasy quiet of caverns where the air feels older than memory. Days in mountain passes where the wind presses so fiercely it seems to push thought itself away. These experiences change the body, sharpening instinct, deepening endurance, stripping away illusions of control. But the deeper transformation is internal, a gradual shift in how the world is perceived. Patterns emerge where before there was only noise. Coincidences begin to feel like deliberate arrangements. The boundary between the possible and the impossible grows less certain. It is here, at this convergence of the inner and outer journey, that the hypothesis of Agartha takes on its most provocative form, not as a static city beneath the earth, but as a living interface between worlds. In this framing, Agartha is neither myth nor material fact alone, but a system designed to operate at the edge of human perception. It appears only when conditions, both environmental and personal, align precisely. A traveler might pass through the same valley 100 times and see only rock and grass, yet on the 101st find the air shimmering with a doorway that was not there before. This would explain why stories from unrelated cultures share not only thematic elements, but specific details. The gates appear rarely, unpredictably, and only to those ready in ways they may not even comprehend. Readiness, in this sense, is not about physical strength or technological capability, but about alignment between intention, awareness, and restraint. Many traditions speak of this in their own language. In Taoist philosophy, the concept of Wu Wei describes effortless action, moving in harmony with the natural order rather than forcing it. In certain indigenous American teachings, the idea of walking softly refers to living in such a way that one's presence leaves the world better, not depleted. If Agartha exists as a realm apart, it is reasonable to think it would admit only those who embody such principles, for to do otherwise would be to risk its own survival. The evidence we have, fragmentary, often dismissed, gains weight when viewed through this lens. Consider the maps from the 16th and 17th centuries that depict inland waterways and mountain ranges unknown to the cartographer's time, yet later confirmed by exploration. Mainstream historians attribute these anomalies to lucky guesses or composite knowledge from earlier sources. But among seekers, there is the theory that such knowledge came from intermediaries, people who had seen or been told of places beyond the reach of contemporary navigation, perhaps during those rare moments when the gates stood open. The detail in these maps is often too precise to be mere imagination. A bend in a river, the curve of a coastline, the placement of an island later found to exist exactly as drawn. Then there are the artifacts, objects unearthed from strata where they should not be. A perfectly machined sphere found in ancient rock, a fragment of woven cloth preserved in a layer far older than the accepted timeline of textile production. Inscriptions in a script that matches none of the known writing systems, yet bears structural resemblance to several. Mainstream science categorizes such finds as out-of-place artifacts, often storing them away without further study, lest they disrupt established chronologies. But in the hypothesis of Agartha, these could be remnants, accidental or intentional, of contact, material proof that another stream of history has run parallel to ours, occasionally intersecting. Even the accounts dismissed as pure folklore gain new resonance when examined collectively. From the Hopi stories of the ant people who sheltered humans underground during a great fire in the sky, to the Tibetan legends of Shambala, guarded by snow and time, to the Norse myths of Svartalfaheim, a hidden realm of master craftsmen. Each points to a subterranean domain inhabited by beings of knowledge and skill. The surface trappings differ according to culture, but the core elements remain. A place apart, accessible only under extraordinary circumstances, offering protection, wisdom, or both. If these convergences are not coincidence, they suggest a system of deliberate concealment and selective contact. In this model, Agartha does not merely hide, it curates its interactions, much as a careful gardener prunes and tends only what is ready to flourish. And just as a gardener might withhold certain seeds until the season is right, so too might the inner realm withhold its presence until the surface demonstrates the maturity to receive it. This could explain why some seekers report fleeting encounters, a vision, a voice, a sudden displacement, followed by an inability to return. The gate opened just long enough to deliver a message or seed an idea, then closed to preserve its own balance. The implications of this are both humbling and daunting. It means that all the technology, funding, and logistical power at our disposal cannot force the encounter. It must be invited, earned in ways that cannot be measured by instruments or mapped by satellites. This reframes the entire investigative process. The seeker's greatest tool is not the drone or the drill, but the cultivation of qualities that resonate with the inner world's own frequency. Patience over haste, stewardship over exploitation, inquiry over conquest. From this perspective, the real investigation is as much sociological and philosophical as it is geographical. What would it take for our civilization to meet those conditions? Reduction in environmental harm is a start, but deeper still would be the adoption of a worldview in which progress is measured not solely by growth or dominance, but by the stability and well-being of all life systems. This echoes certain interpretations of ancient Golden Age myths, not eras without challenge, but periods when challenge was met without destructive overreach. Some will argue this is idealism, a projection of our hopes onto a convenient myth. And perhaps they are right. But even if Agartha is nothing more than a story, it serves a function that is far from trivial. It is a lens through which we can examine ourselves, a compass pointing toward a possible future. In that sense, the search is never wasted. Each expedition, each archive search, each night spent under alien stars adds another layer to the narrative, shaping both the seeker and the society they return to. For those listening now, perhaps in the still hours of the night, the image of Agartha might linger, not as a fantastical escape, but as a challenge. Somewhere, beneath the tectonic plates and layers of history, there may lie a city whose streets have never known the roar of engines, whose air has never been thick with smoke, whose rivers have never been poisoned. Or perhaps that city is not beneath us at all, but ahead of us, a place we will build when we finally learn that survival depends on harmony as much as on ingenuity. Until then, the gates, whether carved in stone or existing only in the folds of perception, remain closed. But they are not locked forever. And for those willing to walk the long road, not knowing if the end will reveal a hidden sunlit chamber or simply the reflection of their own transformation, the journey will always be worth it. Because in seeking the city beneath the world, we might just find the world we were meant to live in all along. And so, as we close this chapter of our investigation, we leave the question open, as it must be. Does Agartha exist? Or is it we who must exist in a new way for Agartha to appear? Until that answer comes, the search continues, in the earth, in the archives, and in ourselves. This is where the trail pauses, not ends. And as always, welcome to historic sleep.